Chapter 1550. Only then did Jiang Shang understand Lu Ye's intentions. It was reasonable. If even he was interested in the Wanxiang galaxy, others would naturally be interested as well. Moreover, Lu Yi had a star chart that led to the Wanxiang galaxy. If he could take the cultivators from his galaxy to the Wanxiang Sea, it would benefit his fellow countrymen. Jiang Shang didn't agree immediately. Instead, he asked, "How many people do you want to bring with you?" If it was just 1 or 2 people like Lu Yi, it wouldn't be a problem at all. The indefinite galaxy had stood tall in the starry skies for so many years, so it naturally had its own means of dealing with such situations. But if there were too many people, then they would have to discuss it properly. Otherwise, if a misunderstanding arose, it would be difficult for everyone to clean up the mess. Lu Yi shook his head and said, "I don't know the exact number of people. However, please be at ease, Realm Lord. When the time comes, the people I'll bring will not be sunshine. If it's Yu Yao, there will not be more than 2 people. The rest will be constellations." There was no sunlight in the Jade Conch realm at all. Even if he wanted to, he wouldn't be able to bring Yu Yao here. There were definitely not many Yu Yao here. It would already be good enough if he could bring 2 Yu Yao from the Jade Conch realm. Jiang Shang nodded. Since that's the case, there's no problem. Then he changed the topic. "However, I have a request." Jiang Shang nodded. "But I do have a request." "Sector Lord, please speak." Jiang Shang looked at him and smiled. "When you pass by our galaxy, I hope you can bring along a group of cultivators from our galaxy." Lu Yi had already guessed that he would have such an idea, so he didn't refuse. He immediately nodded and said, "No problem." On the other side, Yueyao coughed softly. "Little friend Lu, my Daluo galaxy is also interested in this matter. I wonder if you can make things convenient for us? Bring along the people from my Great Net galaxy." Originally, he had come to visit Jiang Shang for another matter. He didn't expect to run into this situation by chance. He couldn't miss this opportunity. This was probably his only chance to enter the Wanxiang star system. If he missed this opportunity, there wouldn't be another one. Therefore, even though he wasn't familiar with Lu Yi, he could only thicken his skin and mention it. Afraid that Lu Yi would refuse, he hurriedly added, "Of course, if you agree, I, Big Luo, will give you a gift as thanks." Lu Yi waved his hand and said, "There's no need for a thank you gift. It's something that happened along the way. If Big Luo is interested, you can first gather people and wait." Yueyao's eyes lit up. "Young friend, you're a straightforward person. This old man thanks you." As he spoke, he raised his wine cup and offered a toast. Lu Yi raised his glass and drank. Lu Yi put down his wine cup and said, "However, there is one thing that I have to make clear in advance. Although the 10,000 Elephant Sea is a sea that accommodates hundreds of rivers and cultivators from countless galaxies, and does not prohibit cultivators from the constellations from coming in and out, the 10,000 Elephant Galaxy has set some rules for the convenience of managing the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Please abide by them. Otherwise, if you break the rules when you reach the Earth domain, no one can save you." The group hurriedly sat up straight. Big Luo Yueyao said, "Young friend, please speak." She looked like she was all ears. On the 10,000 Elephant Sea, the structure of the forces can be based on the domain structure or the galaxy structure. However, no force can have more than 3 Yueyao. As for Rizhao, it is even more impossible to stay on the 10,000 Elephant Sea for long. Therefore, if you want to go to the 10,000 Elephant Sea, the constellations will be the main force. Yueyao will be the minority. Jiang Shang nodded and said, "I seem to have heard of this rule before. This is how it should be." With so many people from so many galaxies gathered in the 10,000 Elephant Sea, if there were no restrictions, it would have been chaotic long ago. If other galaxies can abide by the rules, so can we. Is there anything else to take note of? Lu Yi shook his head and said, "There's nothing special to take note of. However, the 10,000 Elephant Sea is very chaotic and does not prohibit fighting. Therefore, it is not easy to establish a foothold there." Big Luo Yueyao said, "Young friend, if it's convenient for you, please tell us more about the matters over there." The group looked at him eagerly, as if they were a group of country bumpkins who had never seen the world before. Yaya seemed to have eaten her fill and fell asleep in Lu Ye's arms again. Lu Yi gently hugged her and casually talked about the various matters on the 10,000 Elephant Sea. When they heard that there were many wonderful islands on the 10,000 Elephant Sea, and that the top spiritual island could produce spiritual jade veins, the group's eyes lit up. None of the galaxies in the four directions were top-level domains, so they had not even seen what a spiritual jade vein looked like. For a moment, they could not help but fantasize. If they could seize a top-level spiritual island on the 10,000 Elephant Sea, wouldn't they be able to sit on a spiritual jade vein? Then it would be of great use to cultivate their own cultivators in the future. However, everyone knew that this was only a dream. There were so many top-level domains and galaxies on the 10,000 Elephant Sea, and they would not have a chance to seize a top-level spiritual island. However, even if they did not seize a top-level spiritual island, it would be enough to seize a mid-level spiritual island. Speaking of the Whitey spirit, when everyone learned that a Whitey spirit was worth several thousand spiritual jades, they were even more shocked. Lu Yi even took out a Whitey spirit on the spot. After everyone looked at it, Jianghu ordered someone to take it and cook it. When it was served again, each of them ate a little. They could all feel the pure energy contained in the fish meat. Yu Yao praised as she ate. Whether it's the taste or the value of this fish, it is far superior to ordinary spiritual fish. As expected of something born on the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Little friend Lu, as you said, even if one does not have a skill on the 10,000 Elephant Sea, one can still make a living by fishing? Lu Yi said with a strange expression, yes, you can. However, there is a saying in the fisherman's circle, fishing will ruin 3 generations, but playing with fish will ruin a lifetime. Unless there is no other choice, it is best not to get involved. Of course, the group of Yu Yao did not know that this saying was an accusation made by countless fishermen through blood and tears. They also did not know whether they had heard it or not. When they talked about the battle for the Constellation Hall, everyone was even more shocked than before. Tens of millions of constellations had participated in a grand event. Such a scene was unimaginable. No matter how powerful a galaxy was, the number of constellations it had was limited. Tens of millions of constellations. This was a number that no galaxy could reach. With such a large number of constellations gathered together, what kind of grand event would it be? When they learned that those who ranked higher in the Constellation Palace would not only be able to leave their names on the rankings, but could even use the power of the Constellation Palace to promote Yu Yao, the group of Yu Yao became excited. The Constellation Palace did not have time to participate this time, but as long as the Constellation Palace was still there would always be a chance for their juniors to participate in the future. If they could leave their names on the rankings, not only would they be able to make a name for themselves in the galaxy, but there would also be real benefits. They could not miss out on such an opportunity. Luo Shenxi's eyes shone. May I know Brother Lu's ranking on the rankings? He did not know Lu Ye's true strength, but he felt that Lu Yi was very strong. In his opinion, Lu Yi would definitely be able to leave his name on the rankings. Lu Yi slowly shook his head. I am ashamed to say this. Although I participated in the opening of the Constellation Palace, I was delayed midway and did not manage to leave my name. It was all the Constellation Palace's fault for bringing him to their palace. However, even though he did not manage to leave his name, he did not lose anything by obtaining a treasure like the minor Constellation Palace. Instead, he profited. What about me? Brother Lu, what do you think my ranking would be if I participated? Luo Shenxi asked again. Lu Yi looked apologetic. I have never fought with a powerhouse on the rankings, so I can't say for sure. In his opinion, Luo Shenxi would have no problem getting into the top 100, but that was about the limit. This was because there were too many veteran constellations participating in the Constellation Palace. However, this was his own judgment, so there was no need to say it out loud. The banquet continued. The group of Yu Yao asked about the 10,000 manifestations sea, and Lu Yi told them everything he knew. He told them about the magnificent wonders of space. In the end, the Yu Yao finally gave up when there was nothing left to say. However, they were still somewhat unsatisfied. They wanted nothing more than to enter the 10,000 manifestations galaxy and see it with their own eyes. Jianghu said, how long will it take for you to reach the Jade Conch Palace? Lu Yi replied, about 2 years. Jiang Shang nodded, go for 2 years, come back for 2 years, let's count it as 5 years. Then little friend, it's a deal. I'll make preparations during these 5 years, and when you return, I'll follow you to the Myriad Phenomenon Galaxy. No problem. Lu Yi nodded. De Luo Yu Yao hurriedly said, De Luo too. She was afraid that she would be left behind. Jiang Shang raised his cup. This is a blessing for Wu Ding. Thank you, Li. Cheers. The Yu Yao raised their cups in unison. Thank you, Li. Jiang Shang put down his cup and said, there's one more thing I need to ask you. Which direction are you going to take to reach the Jade Conch Palace? He then added, please don't misunderstand. I'm not trying to find out where you're going. It's just that there's a direction outside the indefinite galaxy that's a little troublesome. What kind of trouble? Lu Yi asked. Jiang Shang said, a few decades ago, an insect hive drifted over from that direction. An insect hive? Lu Yi frowned. The insect race? That's right. Jiang Shang nodded. And that's no ordinary hive. There's more than one Rizhao overseeing it. They've been eyeing Wu Ding covetously for a long time, and there's a faint suspicion that they're about to invade. That's why it shouldn't be a problem if you go in a different direction, but if you happen to be going in that direction, things might be a little troublesome. Lu Yi didn't know if he was going in that direction. After some thought, he took out the star map given to him by the reincarnation tree. Please take a look at it for me, Realm Lord. There was nothing to hide from this star map. It wouldn't matter even if Jiang Shang knew the exact route from the Jade Conch Palace to the Vientiane Galaxy. He walked forward and presented the star map. Jiang Shang took it and frowned. This is a little troublesome. He discovered that according to the guidance on the star chart, Lu Yi was heading in the direction of the insectoid hive. Lu Yi was someone who the vampires and the insect race had put a bounty on. If the insect race were to discover his whereabouts, they would surely hunt him down to the bitter end. Lu Ye's heart skipped a beat upon seeing Jiang Shang's reaction. Such a coincidence? Jiang Shang nodded. Such a coincidence. After a pause, he glanced at Yaya, who was in Lu Ye's arms. Don't worry, young friend. With someone protecting you, you should be fine as long as you're careful. Chapter 1551. Lu Yi didn't just have to consider his own safety. He also had to consider what would happen if he brought the cultivators from his galaxy with him. He could hide his whereabouts, so he believed that as long as he was careful, there wouldn't be any problems. However, if he brought people from the Jade Conch Galaxy over, it would be difficult for him to hide his entire fleet. If they were discovered with the nature of the insectoids, they wouldn't let the fleet pass safely. When a dispute arose, the Jade Conch Galaxy wouldn't be able to resist. After pondering for a moment, Lu Yi asked, is it possible to take a detour? His position in the starry sky was uncertain. The star chart given to him by the reincarnation tree showed him a route, but he didn't necessarily have to follow the star chart. He could take a detour to avoid the insectoids' territory and continue on the route on the star chart. However, this would take a lot of time, and he might even waste several years. Jiang Shang said, it may be possible, but as long as the hive is still there, no one knows how far the insectoids' tentacles will extend. If little friend takes a detour and runs into them, trouble will be inevitable. This was a bit difficult. Lu Yi couldn't ask Jiang Shang to use the power of the indefinite galaxy to deal with the hive. The hive had drifted here decades ago. If the indefinite galaxy had the ability to deal with it, they wouldn't have delayed it until today. Since they hadn't, it meant that the situation was very tricky. Just as Lu Yi was in a difficult position, Jiang Shang spoke again. Little friend, don't worry. Before you return, we will definitely deal with the hive. It won't delay our journey to the Myriad Sea. Lu Yi was slightly stunned. Although he agreed to take the people from the indefinite galaxy to the Myriad Sea, in the end, this was only a mutually beneficial cooperation. After all, the Jade Conch Galaxy fleet needed to pass through, so he couldn't leave them behind. Now, Jiang Shang actually took the initiative to say that he wanted to deal with the hive that had more than one Rizhao guarding it. Lu Yi didn't know why. After all, such a battle wouldn't benefit the indefinite galaxy. However, Lu Yi only thought about it for a moment before he reacted. If it was really as he thought, then his trip here would be a great help to the indefinite galaxy. Lu Yi didn't say much and only raised his cup. "Thank you, Realm Lord." It was true that he had helped the indefinite galaxy a great deal, but if the indefinite galaxy could deal with the hive, she would also be helping him. Jiang Shang and Lu Yi drank a cup of wine and smiled at each other. Nothing needed to be said. Lu Yi did not intend to stay for long, so he got up and bid farewell. The road ahead was long, and he had been delayed here for half a month, so he wanted to set off on his return journey as soon as possible. Jiang Shang naturally tried to persuade Lu Yi to stay, probably because he wanted to know more about the 10,000 Elephant Sea, but seeing Lu Ye's firm attitude, he could only let him go. He ordered Kong Qing to escort Lu Yi out of the indefinite galaxy, and Kong Qing complied. Outside the Grand Hall, Kong Qing summoned his star boat and stood on it, waiting. Lu Yi held Yaya in her arms and bid farewell to Hua Qing. They talked and laughed for a while. All of them were meaningless words. Moments later, Lu Yi boarded the star boat, and Kong Qing turned it into a streak of light that shot out of the indefinite realm. Hua Qing watched them leave, his heart filled with gratitude. Although Lu Yi had said a lot of nonsense to him before he left, he knew in his heart that Lu Yi had done it on purpose. This way, the unbounded realm would know that Lu Yi had a good relationship with Qi Kong, and Qi Kong's situation would be better in the future. What a pity! Not far from Hua Qing, Luo Shenxi looked in the direction of Lu Ye's departure with the regretful expression. The reason he came here with Yu Yao was to fight with Lu Yi, but in the end, there was no place for him to speak at such an occasion, and Lu Yi was in a hurry to leave. Of course, he could not make any rude requests. Although he did not get what he wanted, Luo Shenxi looked forward to the future even more. If he could really go to the 10,000 Elephant Galaxy, he would be able to see the glory of the top constellations of many galaxies. This made him very excited, and he looked forward to Lu Ye's return more than anyone else. This matter is over. This old man will take his leave first. Hua Qing prepared to leave. The woman who had spoken to Lu Yi earlier, Yu Yao, smiled and said, "Sect Master Hua, there is no hurry. Please return to the hall first. The Realm Master has said that he has something to discuss with you." Hua Qing said in fear and trepidation, "This old man will naturally obey the Realm Master's orders." He knew that this was because of Lu Ye's performance just now. Otherwise, he would not have been invited back. If the indefinite realm really had something important to discuss, it would not have been his turn to participate. The group of Yu Yao and Luo Shenxi returned to the hall and sat down. As soon as he sat down, Hua Qing heard Yu Yao say, "This Lu Ye came at the right time. This way, the matter our two realms need to plan will not be a problem." Jiang Shang smiled and said, "That's right. This seat did not expect such a good thing to happen at this juncture. The heavens are really helping us." Yu Yao said, "Actually, the two realms are not unaware of the seriousness of the matter. It's just that the calamity is at the indefinite realm's doorstep. They are counting on the indefinite realm to come out first." Jiang Shang said, "How could this seat not know what they are planning? The indefinite realm alone is not enough to deal with the hive." These words were a little humble. If the indefinite realm really wanted to deal with the hive, she had the ability to do so. However, she would have to pay a huge price. In a single battle, the entire cultivation world of the galaxy would be crippled, and the standard of cultivation would regress by thousands or even tens of thousands of years. If that happened, the indefinite realm's final fate would be to be nibbled away by the other three galaxies. In the future, the indefinite galaxy would cease to exist. This was an outcome they could not accept. Therefore, even if they had the ability, the indefinite galaxy had not really made a move for the past few decades. They only set up a defensive line outside their own territory to prevent the hive from invading. The other two sunshine powerhouses in the indefinite realm were stationed at the defensive line all year round. Over the past few decades, the indefinite realm had been working together to deal with the hive. Although the threat of the hive was right at the doorstep of the indefinite realm, if the indefinite realm were to suffer, who knew which galaxy would be next? The insectoids were a scourge. If they were not nipped in the bud, they would only become more and more troublesome because their reproductive ability was too strong. Among the other 3 galaxies, only the Daluo galaxy had expressed their willingness to help the indefinite realm more than a decade ago. Jianghu and Beixian were watching from the sidelines, waiting to reap the spoils of war. Of course, Jianghu knew that the powerhouses of the other 2 galaxies did not really think that way. They knew the dangers of the insectoids, but they were not willing to contribute too much. They only wanted the indefinite realm to bear the banner. Daluo Yueyao had come to the indefinite realm because of the hive. The matter had been delayed for decades. If it continued to be delayed, the insectoids would only become stronger. If they were to reach a certain level, even if the 4 galaxies worked together, they might not be able to defeat them. Once the indefinite realm was defeated, the other 3 galaxies would not be able to escape unscathed. In the end, they would all be devoured by the insectoids. He planned to persuade Jianghu first, then contact the powerhouses of Jianghu and Beixian to prepare for a war against the insectoids. He had done this once before, but it did not yield much results. It was the same this time. Before Lu Ye's arrival, Jianghu had no intention of relenting. The indefinite realm's intentions were simple. Either everyone died together, or everyone worked together. In any case, the indefinite realm would not be the first to stand out. Otherwise, even if they won the war against the insectoids, the indefinite realm situation would not be too good in the future. In such a complicated situation, it could be said that everyone in the 4 galaxies had their own plans. Without a suitable opportunity, it would be very difficult to form an alliance. Lu Ye's arrival was the best opportunity. As long as news of the Wanxiang Sea spread, both Jianghu and Beixian would be very interested. However, if they wanted to go to the Wanxiang Sea, they would have to wait for Lu Ye's safe return. If they wanted Lu Ye to return safely, they would have to deal with the hive first. Lu Ye had realized this possibility at the time, which was why he felt that his arrival would be a great help to the indefinite realm. Even if he was not a cultivator of the indefinite realm and did not know much about it, some things did not need to be understood to have some guesses. That little friend Lu is a straightforward person. Since he's willing to take my people to the Wanxiang Sea, I believe he'll be willing to take Jianghu and Beixian's people as well. It's just a few more people, it won't be too much of a hindrance to him. Realm Lord Jiang, I'll discuss with Jianghu and Beixian. I believe they'll be very interested in the Wanxiang Sea. If they agree, Jianghu said straightforwardly, as long as they're willing to work hard, the indefinite realm will be fine. Then it's settled. Yueyao laughed and stood up. There's no time to lose. I'll set off now. Big Luo Yueyao hurriedly left with a confident look on her face. No wonder he was so confident. No one could resist the temptation of the Wanxiang Sea. Who would have thought that the disaster that had plagued the 4 galaxies for so many years could be resolved because of the arrival of an outsider? Lu Ye of the 9 heavens was really the 4 galaxies' lucky star. After Yueyao left with Luo Shenxi, Jianghu pondered for a moment. It was unknown what he was thinking about. After a long time, he turned to look at Hua Cheng. Sect Master Hua, I heard that little friend Lu has a good relationship with your disciple? Hua Cheng hurriedly said, little friend Lu and my disciple met in the alpha origin stage of the reincarnation tree. As for their relationship, it seems to be quite good. Good, very good. Jianghu praised. We cultivators will meet many people in our lives. There are bad people, good people, or noble people. If you meet them, you must cherish them. Hua Cheng repeatedly agreed. The war with the insect race is not far away. When the time comes, I'll need you and your disciple to work hard. Your disciple has just ascended to the star constellation realm and is still a little weak. If Sect Master Hua is not worried, please send him to the indefinite realm. The Heaven Enlightenment Pavilion is about to open. Hua Cheng's expression brightened and he hurriedly stood up. Thank you for your guidance, Realm Lord. My disciple will never forget your kindness. Apart from little Hua, who was still strong, everyone else in the family of 7 showed symptoms. My symptoms aren't serious. I had a fever 2 days ago, and now the most uncomfortable thing is that my brain fog has appeared again. My thoughts are a little muddled. End of chapter. Chapter 1552. The unfixed heavenly revelation pavilion was a famous secret realm even in the 4 cardinal galaxies. It was especially beneficial for constellation realm cultivators. The heavenly revelation pavilion only opened once every 10 years, and only 3 people could enter at a time. In the past, only the most talented constellation realm cultivators in the unfixed realm had the right to enter. This time, Do Lang actually got a spot. Hua Qing knew that this was all thanks to Lu Yi. If it weren't for Lu Yi, Do Lang wouldn't have gotten such a good thing. He couldn't help but sigh in excitement. To think that he had spent his whole life in the unfixed realm, but in the end he didn't have as much face as a foreign cultivator. However, this couldn't be helped. Not everyone could grasp a safe route to the Wanxiang Sea. Hua Qing left the unfixed realm with a heavy heart, preparing to return to the Red Sky realm and send Do Lang over. At this moment, on the starboat that was sailing towards the outer reaches of indefinite, Kong Cheng apologized to Lu Yi with a serious expression and a smile on his face. "I didn't think things through just now and offended you. Please forgive me, young friend." "You're too kind. It's just a small matter," Lu Yi replied. Kong Cheng saw that he really didn't mean to blame him. Only then did his expression relax. He took out a storage ring. "Little friend, this is what the Realm Lord ordered me to prepare before we left. It's just some worthless things. Please accept it." Lu Yi didn't stand on ceremony. He reached out and took it. Using his divine sense, he found that the things inside were none other than colorful spiritual fruits. He understood. It seemed that Jianghu saw Ya's previous performance and specially ordered people to prepare gifts for her. These spiritual fruits were no doubt extraordinary. There were many varieties and quantities. It was impossible to say that they were worthless. Such a large pile of spiritual fruits was worth at least tens of thousands of spiritual jades. "The Realm Lord is too kind." Lu Yi nodded. The age gap between them and Jianghu was obvious. The reason why Jianghu had asked Kong Cheng to see him off was to give him a chance to apologize. Now that the matter had been settled, there wasn't much to talk about. Kong Cheng steered the starboat in silence, while Lu Yi placed the Panshan saber horizontally on his knees and entered the Cyan Hall to fight against Yan Shi. Yan Shi was undoubtedly very strong, but his entire body was as slippery as a loach. He flitted around the green hall, and Lu Yi could not even touch the corner of his clothes even after using all his strength. But if Yan Shi found an opportunity, it would be accompanied by a thunderous strike. Lu Yi could not help but gasp in amazement at Yan Shi's miraculous vertical sweep technique. He understood that if he wanted to get rid of Yan Shi and get past him, he would have to learn his vertical sweep technique. Otherwise, if he couldn't even hit him, how could he defeat him? Time passed slowly, and in the blink of an eye, 3 months had passed. One day, when Lu Yi opened his eyes, Kong Cheng, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke up. "Young friend, we're about to leave Neverwinter." Under normal circumstances, with Lu Ye's speed, it would take more than 3 months to traverse a Pairon, but Kong Cheng was much faster. This was one of the reasons why Jianghu had Kong Cheng send Lu Yi off. They wanted Lu Yi to return to Jade Conch as soon as possible. When Lu Yi heard this, he looked up and saw some traces of buildings on a huge floating continent in front of him. Moreover, there were many cultivators active around the floating continent. As if sensing Lu Ye's confusion, Kong Cheng explained, "Ever since that hive drifted here a few decades ago, a Pairon has built a defensive frontier to guard against the invasion of the insect race. Now, 2 of a Pairon's Rizhao are overseeing it." Saying so, he steered the starboat toward the floating continent. It took them almost half a day to reach the floating continent. This floating continent looked like a fragment of a realm that had been broken for tens of thousands of years. It had been drifting in the starry sky just like that. Now, a Pairon's Rizhao had used some method to bind it here and turn it into a frontline fortress. Previously, Lu Yi had not seen much because of the floating continent, but when he got on the floating continent, Lu Yi discovered a strange sight in the starry sky. Tens of thousands of kilometers away in the starry sky, there was an oval-shaped object that looked like a beehive quietly standing there. At a glance, the beehive was at most the size of a fist, but considering the distance, Lu Yi estimated that it was at least the size of a planet. An insect hive. Lu Yi recognized the details of this thing at a glance. This completely overturned Lu Ye's understanding of insect hives. The insect hives he had seen before were basically all underground. Even if they were large, there was a limit to their size. However, the size of this hive was beyond his imagination. How was this an insect hive? It was more like a planet. However, it was different from ordinary planets. Under the control of the insect race, an insect hive like this could drift through the starry sky. If it encountered a realm with vitality, the insect race would swarm out in full force. Once the insect race left, the realm would also die. Even from a great distance, Lu Yi could see traces of a large number of insect race members entering and leaving the hive. Not only were there traces of insect race members around the hive, but they could also be seen everywhere in the nearby starry sky. In a sense, the insect race was even more dangerous than the blood race as one of the two greatest disasters in the starry sky. Due to the uniqueness of the insect hive, countless realms and planets with vitality had suffered as it roamed around. Under normal circumstances, no matter what race a cultivator was from, they would find a way to exterminate the blood tribe or the insect tribe when they encountered them in the starry sky. These two races were truly notorious and hated by everyone. However, after countless years, these two races had not been exterminated. The insectoid hive stood in front of Apeiron's door, eyeing it like a tiger watching its prey. Although there were no signs of invasion, anyone would feel uncomfortable with such a thing in front of their door. No one knew if the insectoid hive would suddenly invade Apeiron's system. Of the two Rizhao overseeing this place, only one remained here. The other had gone out to investigate the situation. Kong Cheng led Lu Yi to greet Rizhao. She was a woman with a cold expression. No one knew what she had encountered, but she was actually blind in one eye. Her left eye was covered with an eye patch, looking extremely strange. She should be a weapon cultivator because she was dressed very neatly and her aura was extremely sharp. Kong Cheng seemed to be in awe of her. After a while of telepathic communication, the woman looked at Lu Yi in surprise and then looked at the restless Yaya in Lu Ye's arms. If it weren't for Kong Cheng's words, she really couldn't see anything unusual about Yaya. But such an ordinary little girl, who didn't seem to have any traces of cultivation, was actually a Rizhao like her? The insect race has been a little restless recently. It won't be easy for you to cross the starry sky ahead. Even if you have Rizhao's protection, it will be troublesome if you accidentally expose your whereabouts. There are more than one Rizhao in the insect race. Lu Yi said, "Senior, please point out a suitable route." Although he could conceal himself, and the new concealment spiritual tattoo he deduced was more effective than before, Yaya couldn't. He had already tried to make Yaya conceal herself on the way here, but Yaya looked at him blankly, as if she didn't know what concealment was. Moreover, if she used concealment to fly, her speed would be far slower than the starboat, so Lu Yi felt that it was better to drive the starboat forward. Therefore, there must be a relatively safe route. This was also the reason why he followed Kong Cheng to visit Rizhao. Rizhao had been here for decades and undoubtedly knew the situation here very well. There is no suitable route. Now that the insect race's tentacles are everywhere, if you want to pass through here, I can't guarantee that you won't expose your whereabouts. At most, I can reduce the risk. That's enough. Lu Yi nodded. Rizhao didn't talk nonsense and immediately pointed out a route for Lu Yi. According to the information she received, the risk of being exposed was the lowest if he took this route. Even if he was exposed, it was unlikely that he would attract the attention of the insect race's Rizhao. "When do you leave?" Rizhao asked again. "I'm leaving now," Lu Yi replied. "Then let's go." Rizhao finished speaking and stepped out. Lu Yi and Kong Cheng looked at each other. Kong Cheng said, "Little friend, I can only send you this far. Please be careful on the road ahead." "Many thanks, Brother Kong." Lu Yi expressed his gratitude. Although the two of them didn't get along well the first time they met, Lu Yi didn't suffer any losses. Kong Cheng, on the other hand, had lost an arm. Now that the other party had escorted him all the way here, Lu Yi naturally wouldn't take the slight unpleasantness to heart. Lu Yi was just about to leave when he heard a cold shout from the depths of space, "Get out here!" Lu Yi was startled because he recognized the voice as belonging to Rizhao. He didn't know what she was doing. However, Lu Yi soon realized what she was doing. Not long after her voice rang out, an extremely violent energy fluctuation came from the depths of space. Even from a great distance, one could feel the shock waves from the collision. It made one feel uneasy. Lu Yi and Kong Qing hurriedly flew out of the void continent and looked into the depths of space. There, they saw experts fighting and stirring up space. One of them was Hikari, and the other was Hikari of the Zerg race. Lu Yi was still feeling the power of the two Rizhao's attacks when Kong Qing urged, "Little friend, if you don't leave now, when are you going to leave?" Rizhao had provoked Rizhao of the insect race for no reason and even fought with him. Clearly, it wasn't on a whim. This was undoubtedly to create chaos and draw the attention of the insect race so that Lu Yi could leave safely. Lu Yi understood and didn't hesitate. He immediately summoned his planetary boat and flew into the depths of space according to the route Rizhao had given him. The journey was indeed peaceful. Half a day later, they could no longer feel the shockwaves from the battle behind them. Lu Yi sat upright on the planetary boat, Yaya was eating spirit fruits, and Li Shang was in charge of steering the boat. After hiding in Lu Ye's divine ocean for a few months, she could finally come out and take a breather. Lu Yi wasn't worried about passing through this part of space. With Yaya by his side, even if they were unlucky enough to encounter Rizhao of the insect race, they still had the power to fight back. End of chapter. Chapter 1553. Lu Yi did not place all his hopes on Yaya. Ever since she took action last time, Lu Yi had discovered a problem. Although Yaya was indeed as strong as Rizhao, there was clearly something wrong with her body. Once she took action, she would quickly fall into a weakened state and then fall into a deep sleep. Therefore, it was best to avoid her as much as possible. However, there were some troublesome matters that could not be avoided even if one wanted to, especially when Lu Yi did not conceal himself. Instead, he rode the planetary ship ostentatiously through the city. Although he followed Rizhao's guidance and took a route where there were fewer insectoids, he was still discovered by the insectoids. Less than half a day after leaving the floating continent where the indefinite frontline fortress was located, Lu Yi discovered that the insectoids were pursuing him from the side. These insectoids were at the constellation level, and their speed was far slower than the planetary ships. Therefore, they were soon left behind. As the planetary ship continued forward, it was like a small fish that had fallen into a shark's pond. No matter where it went, there were insectoids chasing after it from all directions. However, these insectoids were not as fast as the planetary ship, so their efforts were futile. In the end, they could only watch as the planetary ship disappeared into the depths of the starry sky. Occasionally, some scattered insectoids would hear the news and try to intercept them, but they would be scattered by the planetary ship. Those who did not dodge in time were likely to be killed on the spot. The insectoids were a very strange race. They had an extremely close and mysterious connection with the hives that gave birth to them. Therefore, the insectoids could use the hives to quickly spread the news without the need for transmission. With such convenience, as long as one insectoid discovered Lu Ye's planetary ship, it would be equivalent to the entire swarm discovering the planetary ship's whereabouts. Therefore, even if the insectoids failed to catch up to Lu Yi, the swarm would be able to block his path. Thanks to Rizhao's guidance, Lu Yi did not encounter any strong insectoids along the way, so the journey was quite smooth. A few days later, a dark cloud suddenly appeared in the starry sky ahead. Lu Yi looked over and found that it was not a dark cloud, but a dense swarm of insectoids. This surprised Lu Yi, because one had to have a constellation if they wanted to travel through the starry sky with their physical body. No matter how easy it was for the insectoids to breed and how fast they grew, it was impossible for them to have so many constellations. The insectoid constellations he had encountered before were all scattered. At most, there were 2 or 3 insectoids in a squad. There were at least tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of insectoids gathered in this dark cloud. How could an insectoid hive nurture so many constellations? With such strength, the insectoids could easily attack a Pyrrhon and take her down. As if seeing Lu Ye's doubts, Li Shang opened his mouth and said, "The insect race has a very special physique, different from all the other races in the starry skies. If cultivators of other races want to survive in the starry skies, they must have a constellation, but some special insect races don't. They are born with the ability to resist the erosion of the starry sky's energy." Lu Yi finally understood why there were so many insectoids in front of them. Not all of them were constellations. This was the same as astral beasts. Astral beasts were born with the ability to survive in space. This was their innate ability. Although he had encountered many insect races in the 9 prefectures, he had not encountered any in the starry sky, so he did not know about these things. The cloud of insectoids was pitch black, like a dark cloud. They were not far away from each other, and the planetary ship was too fast. It was too late to change course. Li Shang could only brace himself and steer the planetary ship toward the cloud of insectoids. Lu Yi picked up Yaya, who had been sitting in his arms, and put her down. He patted her head and said, "Stay here and don't move." He was afraid that if he did not warn her, Yaya would suddenly attack. Although Yaya could easily take care of the problem before her, she was still a trump card. It was better to use her at a critical moment, lest she fall into a deep sleep after attacking. Yaya held a pear spirit fruit the size of a bowl in her hands. She nodded obediently as she gnawed on it. She said in a muffled voice, "Yaya won't move." Lu Yi slowly got up and pulled out the Panshan saber from his waist. He looked at the approaching cloud of insectoids in silence. Suddenly, he remembered that the insectoids and the blood race had joined hands and issued a bounty for him. If the constellations of the blood race could recognize him, the insectoids might be able to as well. He then urged the Thousand Face to change his appearance so that the insectoids would not recognize him. In the next moment, the spiritual ship crashed into the cloud of insectoids. At close range, he could sense that the insectoids were indeed not constellations. Many of them were at the divine ocean level, and some were even at the true lake level. Under such a fast and violent crash, the cloud of insectoids was immediately torn open. Countless insectoids were turned into ashes in an instant. The planetary ship crashed into the cloud of insectoids recklessly, like a knife cutting through tofu. Everywhere it passed, countless insectoids were killed or injured. Lu Ye's vision darkened. He was surrounded by insectoids. Those insectoids who were not constellations were fearlessly using their flesh and blood as barriers to stop the planetary ship from moving forward. However, the effect was minimal. If there were only divine ocean and true lake-level insectoids, it would not be difficult for the planetary ship to break through. However, there were not only divine ocean and true lake-level insectoids in this cloud of insectoids, but also constellation-stage insectoids. It was clear at a glance how to distinguish whether an insect had the strength of a constellation or not. For insects, unless they were exceptionally gifted, they would not be able to develop intelligence. Just like the insects that Lu Yi had encountered in the 9 regions, no matter how strong they would only follow their instincts. Moreover, from their appearance, they were insects of various shapes and sizes that had been magnified countless times. For example, the insects that Lu Yi had killed in the Alpha Origin stage were all juniors that the insect race experts had high hopes for. Each and every one of them possessed extraordinary talent and had gained sentience at the divine sea level. Their future achievements were limitless, but unfortunately, Lu Yi had almost wiped them out. The insectoids were different when they reached constellation. Not only did they develop sentience, but they also became cunning and sinister. Even their appearance had changed drastically. Many insectoids had taken on human form. Some of them retained their insectoid characteristics, but many of them did not even have insectoid characteristics. In terms of appearance, they were no different from humans. Therefore, all insectoids in the insectoid swarm that had a human form were basically constellation insectoids. There were more than 30 of them. These constellation insectoids were undoubtedly much more difficult to deal with than ordinary insectoids. When the planetary ship crashed into the insectoid swarm, these insectoids attacked from all directions. Generally speaking, planetary ships were only used for traveling in the starry sky. Low-grade planetary ships did not even have formations. Lu Yi had spent a total of 300,000 spirit jades to buy this planetary ship. Although it did come with a defensive formation, it was not very powerful. How could such a defensive formation withstand the joint attack of dozens of constellation insectoids? It was about to be broken in an instant. Li Shang hurriedly withdrew the formation, lest it was really broken. It would be very troublesome to repair it. Without the protection of the formation, the constellation insectoids were like cats that had smelled blood. They immediately pounced on Lu Yi. Spirit power surged, and blade light poured out like a waterfall. All the insectoid constellation insectoids felt as if a bloody mouth had suddenly opened under the blooming blade light, revealing ferocious fangs, and was about to devour them. Bared fangs. This was the blade technique that was inherited from Qing Li. It was strange. Qing Li's blade aura was agile, but this move was extremely ferocious, which coincided with the concept of the tyrant blade art. When the blade light flashed past, the insectoid constellation at the forefront did not even have time to react before they were smashed into pieces. Among them was an extremely powerful late-stage constellation insectoid. The remaining insectoid constellations were all horrified. They did not expect such a ridiculous thing to happen. Instinctively, they wanted to retreat, but the sharp saber aura had already enveloped them. It rose and fell like a tide, continuous and endless. A moment later, the planetary ship rushed out of the encirclement of the insectoid swarm. Compared to when they first saw it, the size of the insectoid swarm had shrunk by more than half. The insectoids in the true lake and divine sea realm were either dead or injured. Even more than 10 insectoids in the constellation realm were killed. The insectoid swarm did not dare to pursue, mainly because they could not catch up. They were only intercepted here after receiving the news. In terms of speed, they were far inferior to the planetary ship. In front of the insectoid swarm, the surviving insectoid constellations looked at the stream of light that the planetary ship had turned into with a horrified expression. Such a long-planned interception had actually ended with the insectoid's defeat. This was the result of only one collision. The insectoid constellations had no doubt that if the insectoid had not been in a hurry to leave, it was completely capable of killing them all. Is there such a constellation in the indefinite galaxy? An insectoid with a protruding mouth and monkey-like cheeks spoke in a deep voice. He had a pair of transparent wings on his back. No one knew what kind of insectoid he was. Who knows? But why would a constellation like him go in that direction? An insectoid was puzzled. If he was really a constellation of the indefinite galaxy, there was no reason for him to go in that direction. That was the direction that was far away from the indefinite galaxy. No matter who he is, he's dead meat. An insectoid with 6 compound eyes on his forehead snorted coldly. Although they were at a disadvantage in their interception, there were even more powerful ones behind them. That human constellation was indeed powerful, but he did not think that the insectoid would be able to pass through that obstacle. Moreover, since their side had suffered a setback, Yu Yao of the insectoid race would definitely rush over. On the planetary ship, Li Shang continued to steer the planetary ship forward. She looked at Lu Ye's back in shock because she realized that Lu Ye's strength seemed to have increased by a lot compared to when he had departed from the Wanxiang Sea. She had used the soul possession secret technique on Lu Yi several times. She could directly sense how strong Lu Yi was. She had originally thought that Lu Yi was already strong enough, but she did not expect that this was not his limit. There was still room for improvement. She had not seen Lu Yi cultivate much during this period. How could he have improved so much? At this moment, Lu Yi was sitting cross-legged with the mountain pan saber unsheathed and placed horizontally across his knees. He raised his hand and gently brushed the blade, feeling the sharpness of the blade. Li Shang's feeling was not wrong. He had become much stronger, but this strength was not due to the increase in his foundation. Since he had departed from the Wanxiang Sea, he had not spent much time cultivating. Even if his foundation had improved, it would not have been by much. Moreover, he was now a late-stage constellation. There was a limit to how much he could improve. The main reason he had become stronger than before was the transformation of the mountain pan saber. It could also be said that this was a huge change brought about by external forces. End of chapter. Chapter 1554. Lu Yi had always wanted the Pan Mountain saber to be thick enough for him to kill. He didn't care about its sharpness at all because he had spirit marks to support it. In an environment like the 9 provinces, the Pan Mountain saber was able to keep up with his cultivation progress after each upgrade, satisfying his need to kill. But things were different in space, especially after encountering some powerful enemies. Lu Yi found that the Pan Mountain saber wasn't sharp enough to deal effective damage to his enemies. This was especially true for people with strong physiques. Even if he blessed the Pan Mountain saber with a divine edge, it still didn't perform well. The battle with Shui Hao of the Blood Clan was the best example. It wasn't that Lu Yi had high standards, but that cultivators couldn't always face enemies in the same realm as them. In outer space, there was bound to be enemies stronger than them. With Lu Ye's current strength, the Pan Mountain saber and the divine edge were more than enough to deal with enemies in the same realm. However, Lu Ye's target wasn't the constellations, but Yu Yao. The Pan Mountain saber was already at the peak of the spirit treasure level. There was no room for improvement unless it was upgraded to a Dharma treasure. However, if it was upgraded to a Dharma treasure, Lu Yi wouldn't be able to activate its power with just his spirit power. Fang's submission came at the right time. Compared to before, the new Pan Mountain saber didn't seem to have changed at all. However, it was much sharper. Even when Lu Yi enhanced it with the Divine Edge spirit mark, it wasn't as sharp as the Pan Mountain saber. Now that it was enhanced with the Divine Edge, its sharpness was even higher. It could be seen from the insectoid constellation that the insectoids weren't as strong as the Blood Clan in terms of physique. However, the insectoids were stronger than the Blood Clan in terms of physical defense. This was because every insectoid had an extremely hard shell. Even if they transformed into constellations and took human form, the shell would still cover the surface of their bodies, forming a natural defense. However, even such a hard shell couldn't withstand a single slash from the new Pan Mountain saber. The late-stage constellation insectoid's shell was especially strong. Lu Yi felt that if the Pan Mountain saber was enhanced with the Divine Edge, he wouldn't be able to break through it even if he attacked it 5 times. Now, however, he only needed 1 slash to kill it. The new Pan Mountain blade that Liao transformed into was a world of difference in sharpness compared to the previous one. This was Lu Ye's first battle after subduing Qi. He was very satisfied with the new mountain saber's performance. That day when he fought with Shui Hao, if he had this Panshan blade in his hand, perhaps Li Shang would not have needed to start a soul battle to kill him. Li Shang felt that Lu Ye's strength had greatly increased because of this. Under the same blade attack, Lu Yi could now cause much more damage than before. The star boat continued forward and didn't run into any more insectoids. However, both Li Shang and Lu Yi could feel that the insectoids had not given up yet. This was only the calm before the storm. Perhaps there was some unknown danger waiting for them ahead. Or perhaps Yu Yao or even Ri Zhao's insectoid experts had chased after them. 10 days later, the star boat, which was flying forward at a high speed, suddenly felt as if it had bumped into an invisible wall and was instantly met with great resistance. The star boat shook violently, as if it had sunk into a swamp. Even though it was still moving forward, its speed was clearly slowing down. Under the great inertia, Lu Ye's body was pushed forward uncontrollably. Yaya and Li Shang, who were beside him, were also pushed forward. Lu Yi reacted quickly and scooped Yaya into his arms. Li Shang was even more decisive as he pounced on Lu Yi, instantly using the soul-binding secret technique. In an instant, Lu Yi felt that his strength had been greatly improved. His 5 senses became sharper, his thoughts faster, and even the flow of his spiritual energy became faster. The speed of the star boat became even slower, and in less than 3 breaths of time, it went from a high speed to a standstill. In the next moment, attacks that blotted out the sky and covered the earth shot towards it from all directions. Lu Yi jumped out of the star boat and dodged the attacks. After he steadied himself, he finally saw the situation in front of him clearly. There were many large and small meteorites in the vicinity. There were countless meteorites like this in the starry sky. However, at this moment, the figures of many star mansions of the insectoids could be seen behind these meteorites. They had been lying in ambush here, waiting for Lu Yi to pass by so that they could attack him. On one of the huge meteorites, there was a furry spider. The spider was as big as a city. It stood on the meteorite, almost occupying the entire meteorite. However, the spider's aura wasn't very strong. At most, it was at the late stage of the star mansions. Lu Yi was slightly surprised because although the spider looked like an insectoid, it wasn't actually an insectoid, but a star beast. It was probably a star beast tamed by the insectoids. Numerous spider webs that couldn't be seen with the naked eye could be seen crisscrossing in the area where the spider was. Lu Yi looked at his star boat again, and only then did he see clearly what was stopping his star boat. It was a huge spider web with the asteroids in the surroundings as its nodes. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't be able to see it. Since the star boat was sailing at a high speed, neither Lu Yi nor Li Shang noticed it. As soon as they crashed into it, they were trapped by the spider web. It had Yu Yao's aura. Lu Yi sized it up coldly and found that it was probably an early-stage Yu Yao. At this moment, Yu Yao was also staring at Lu Yi with cold eyes. To the insectoids, there was nothing in the universe that they couldn't kill. Apart from those who were on good terms with the blood race, all other races were their enemies. Not to mention that Lu Yi had killed many insectoids along the way. He knew that Lu Yi was only at the late stage of the star mansions. The only reason he could reach this place was because of his star boat. Now that his star boat was blocked, he couldn't do anything else. At this moment, he stared at Lu Yi and waved his hand indifferently. Kill him. As for Lu Ye's background and what he wanted to do, he couldn't be bothered to ask. At his command, many insectoid star mansions immediately pounced on Lu Yi. In Lu Ye's arms, Yaya looked angry and showed signs of wanting to attack. However, before she could, Lu Yi slapped her head and said indifferently, "Calm down." An early-stage Yu Yao wasn't worth exposing Yaya. Moreover, in this situation, Lu Yi wanted to test out the results of his recent cultivation. With a raise of his hand, a dozen or so imperial weapons shot out in all directions, each of them powerful. However, these imperial weapons didn't have much effect. Apart from a few that injured a few insectoid star mansions, the rest were all dodged. Lu Yi held Yaya in one hand and wielded his blade in the other. Under the enhancement of Li Shang's soul possession, a faint blood-red color appeared on the surface of his body. The blood-red light shot out in an extremely abnormal trajectory, almost instantly breaking out of the insectoid star mansion's encirclement. The insectoid star mansions didn't even have time to react before one of them let out a cry of shock. Then blood spurted out and his body was cut in half. The Yu Yao insectoid who had been watching coldly from the side narrowed his eyes and stared at Lu Ye's figure in astonishment. Even he hadn't been able to grasp Lu Ye's movements in that instant. Taking a closer look, he saw Lu Ye's figure moving quickly again. What happened next made the Yu Yao insectoid unable to believe his eyes. The human star mansions flitted back and forth across the vast expanse of the starry sky. His figure flickered in and out of existence like a ghost. Every time he appeared, an insectoid star mansions were bound to suffer. They were either decapitated and killed or cut in half at the waist, wailing in pain. Whether it was early stage, middle stage, or late stage star mansions, none of the insectoids targeted by him could withstand a single blow from his blade. Even the insectoid carapace that they were so proud of could not withstand his killing power. The encirclement that the insectoids had been preparing for many days didn't even seem to exist to him. He could easily find an opening and kill his way out of the encirclement. Before the insectoid star mansions could react, he could come back and kill his way through the encirclement. The Yu Yao insectoid was horrified as he watched. To him, this did not seem like a bloody massacre. It was more like the blooming of an art. Even as an enemy, the Yu Yao insectoid had to admit that this human star mansion's killing methods were extremely pleasing to the eye. However, it was precisely this pleasing scene that caused the life force of the insectoids to wither away. It made him shudder from the bottom of his heart. While the Yu Yao insectoid star mansions were shocked, Lu Yi was elated. He had only comprehended Qing Li's bearing fangs from Qi's inheritance so far. He had yet to comprehend the essence of Yan Shi's leaping technique, so he had not passed Yan Shi's test. Even so, he could feel the power of this leaping technique during the battle. It was useful to useful. If it was in the past, facing such an encirclement, he would have no other way to deal with it other than to kill his way out. However, at this moment, with his immature leaping technique, the insectoid star mansions could not fight back at all. Just like when he first fought Yan Shi, the insectoids could not even see his figure. Although he had yet to comprehend the essence of the leaping technique, Lu Yi could use the imperial equipment that he had sent out beforehand to activate the void spirit patterns to move around. Therefore, compared to Yan Shi's leaping technique, which was like flowing water, Lu Ye's leaping technique was more ghostly. When he first saw Yan Shi's leaping technique, Lu Yi guessed that it was a technique used to deal with encirclements. Now that he tried it out, it was indeed effective. Destroy those imperial equipment. The Yu Yao insectoid finally saw some clues. When Lu Yi first attacked, he did not pay much attention to the imperial equipment that he had sent out. They were already in the galaxy, so who would play with imperial equipment? Now, he knew that those imperial equipment were a hidden technique. He gave the order and attacked at the same time, sending the imperial equipment flying or destroying them. Then he rushed into the battlefield and pounced on Lu Yi. He originally thought that he would not need to make a move this time, but who knew that he had no choice but to make a move? Although there were many insectoids on his side, they could not withstand the onslaught of the enemy. If this continued, they would all be wiped out. End of chapter. Chapter 1555. Less than 10 breaths of time had passed since the bug tribe had attacked and Yu Yao had joined the battle. However, more than 10 bug tribe lunar mansions had been slain in this short span of time, and the rest were shocked. Yu Yao of the bug tribe had thought that he would be able to control the situation if he joined the battle, but he was shocked to find that it was useless. Even though he had ordered the destruction of the imperial weapons scattered throughout the battlefield, that figure was still as elusive as ever, and he could not find any trace of him at all. Yu Yao of the bug tribe roared angrily. This scene made him furious. He was indeed powerful, but the enemy did not even bother to exchange blows with him. His figure flitted back and forth, weaving in and out of the bug tribe's formation as he focused on killing the lunar mansions. More and more bug tribe lunar mansions were killed. Their tough shells did not provide them with any sense of security at all. Lu Yi gradually came to a realization. Although his battle with Yan Shi was intense, it was not a true battle to the death. This was because Lu Yi knew that even if he was slain in the Green Hall, he would only lose a strand of his divine sense. Thus, he did not feel the danger of death. However, this was different. This was a true battle. Yu Yao of the bug tribe only saw him reaping the lunar mansions effortlessly, but in reality he was walking the line between life and death every time he flitted about. This was because any mistake could lead to his eternal damnation. Yan Shi's leaping technique was, in reality, a dangerous move. This kind of comprehension could never be experienced in the Great Green Hall. Lu Yi finally understood why he had never passed Yan Shi's test. Even though he had always felt that he had mastered the essence of his flitting technique, he was still no match for Yan Shi. Now that he had such a realization, Lu Yi was confident that he could pass Yan Shi's test. Unfortunately, the timing was not right. Otherwise, he would have really wanted to enter the Green Hall to test out his idea. This was a battle that was different from all the battles in the past. In the battles in the past, Lu Yi had mostly relied on the profoundness of the tyrant saber art to oppress his enemies with supreme might. However, in this unique battle, Lu Yi felt joy for the first time. He felt the joy of moving like the wind and casually taking the lives of his enemies. This was undoubtedly a very novel experience, and Lu Yi could not help but feel a little strange. Flitting was not just about flitting about. Flitting about was a process. If he wanted to kill his enemies, he had to rely on that instant of explosive power after flitting about. Lu Yi was not lacking in this aspect. Be it overbearing knife or Qing Li's bared fangs, they were both methods of explosive power. Even more insectoid constellations died in battle, but that insectoid Yu Yao didn't even manage to touch a single hair on Lu Ye's head. Seeing that less than half of the insectoid constellations were still alive, he hurriedly roared, "Spread out! Hide far away!" The insectoid constellations were already in a state of panic. No one knew if they would be the next unlucky one. Now that they received the order, they immediately scattered in all directions, wanting to escape the battlefield. Lu Yi stared in one direction and gave chase. After a few leaps, he wiped out all the fleeing insectoid constellations. Lu Yi wanted to chase in another direction, but how could the insectoid Yu Yao give him the chance to do so? She stubbornly refused to let him go. Lu Yi repeatedly tried to shake her off, but to no avail. Previously, there were many insectoid constellations acting as cover, and the insectoid Yu Yao's hands were tied, allowing Lu Yi to roam freely. Now that there were no other insectoids around, and she was alone with Lu Yi, she naturally had nothing to worry about. Her transcendence energy surged wildly, and her blood essence surged. Her entire body was covered in a layer of bloody mist, as if she was burning. If the other party was a mid-stage Yu Yao, Lu Yi wouldn't have thought much of it. With the difference in strength, it was useless even if he had any ideas. However, the other party was only an early-stage Yu Yao. Lu Yi felt that he might be able to put up a fight. After making up his mind, he decided not to chase after the insectoid constellations. His figure flashed, turning into a streak of bloody light. Like a breeze, he drifted toward the insectoid Yu Yao as fast as lightning. Seeing that Lu Yi actually dared to take the initiative to attack, Yu Yao flew into a rage. She waited for Lu Yi to get close before suddenly throwing a punch. Powerful transcendence energy condensed on the tip of her fist, waiting for the punch to hit its target before exploding. Yu Yao frowned. She could feel that her punch had missed Lu Yi. Instead, her arm had been slashed by the other party. Sparks flew everywhere. A powerful force traveled through her arm, leaving a 1-inch deep crack on her carapace. What great speed, what great strength, and what a sharp knife. Yu Yao of the insectoid race finally understood why the constellations of her race were no match for this human. Such terrifying speed and strength were not something a late-stage constellation could possess. Coupled with the other party's sharp saber, even the insectoid constellation's carapace would not be able to withstand the other party's slash. Even though she was a Yu Yao, her carapace was still damaged. However, this kind of wound didn't affect her at all. She turned her head and saw Lu Ye's figure standing a few miles away, quietly staring at her. Their eyes met. One was spitting fire, while the other was solemn. "I can fight." This was the feeling Lu Yi had after exchanging blows with the other party. After all, he was currently in the state of Li Shang's possession, so he could unleash strength that exceeded his own. However, there was still a gap between their realms, so he still had to be careful. After all, there was a qualitative difference between a constellation's spiritual power and Yu Yao's transcendence energy. Although the other party's punch hadn't landed on him, just the aftershocks of that punch had made him feel threatened. Thus, if he really wanted to fight the other party, he still couldn't fight head-on. There was no chance of victory if he fought head-on. Just the clash of their energies alone gave Lu Yi no chance of victory. Unless he could get Li Shang to initiate a soul battle and destroy the other party's soul. However, Li Shang had only been able to initiate a soul battle against Xue Hao the last time because the other party had let down his guard. That was because Xue Hao felt that victory was already in his grasp. This time, his chances weren't high. Even if Li Shang could really initiate a soul battle, Lu Yi had to face more than one insectoid Yu Yao right now. There were still many insectoid constellations watching from afar. Once the soul battle started, Lu Ye's physical body would be defenseless. He still had to rely on the leaping technique. Strictly speaking, the leaping technique was most suitable in a situation where he was surrounded. The leaping technique was about coming and going like the wind, catching the enemy off guard. Against a single opponent, the leaping technique lost its meaning because there was only one enemy. There was no way to catch others off guard. However, if he couldn't meet force with force, Lu Yi had no other choice. The mountain plate saber was sharp enough, but it only left a small mark on the other party's carapace. It didn't even leave a scratch on the other party's flesh. Lu Yi reckoned that even if he used the divine edge, he still wouldn't be able to do much to the other party. As spiritual power circulated rapidly in his body, Yu Yao could no longer hold herself back. Her figure flickered, and she charged at Lu Yi. Lu Yi raised his saber to meet her. He knew very well that he didn't have many chances to fight someone of a higher realm. He might only have one chance, so he decided to give it his all. In an instant, the two figures collided. Yu Yao punched out with both fists, and a violent surge of energy covered a large area in front of her. She had seen Lu Ye's leaping technique before, so she naturally knew how agile the enemy was. This way, she could seal off all of Lu Ye's escape routes. The barrier condensed from pure transcendence energy was like an extremely sturdy wall, blocking in front of Lu Yi. However, in the next instant, Yu Yao's expression changed. This was because the enemy who had been charging at her aggressively with saber in hand, seemingly wanting to fight her to the death, had suddenly disappeared without a trace. Yu Yao's divine sense spread out, and she instantly grasped the location of Lu Ye's aura. She quickly turned her head and saw that Lu Yi had already appeared beside her. His pitch-black saber slashed down viciously without any fancy moves. Spiritual power surged violently from the blade. This was definitely Lu Ye's full power. He had a ferocious aura that said, either the enemy dies or I dies. However, Yu Yao didn't seem to care at all. She simply raised an arm and held it in front of her. This saber strike looked extremely ferocious, but she had personally experienced Lu Ye's attack before, so she knew that this saber couldn't do anything to her. She could easily block it with the protection of her carapace. She clenched her other hand into a fist and punched at Lu Yi. The saber slashed down. Yu Yao was slightly surprised because she felt that this saber strike had left an even deeper scar on her carapace. Her opponent's saber seemed to have become even sharper than before. However, that was all. If the saber couldn't break through her carapace's protection, it was all in vain. Before she could finish her thoughts, Yu Yao's heart suddenly palpitated. She had a bad feeling about this. Then, she seemed to hear the sound of waves rising and falling. In front of her, Lu Ye's expression was as calm as an ancient well. He ignored the opponent's fist. In reality, he couldn't dodge, so he could only hurriedly form a few holy defenses to protect himself. The coiling mountain saber enhanced by the divine edge spirit inscriptions was indeed sharper than before. However, it could only leave a deeper wound on the opponent's carapace, barely touching the flesh. However, Lu Yi wasn't relying on the divine edge. At this moment, countless tiny waves undulated on the coiling mountain saber's blade. They flowed rapidly along the blade's edge, surging back and forth. In an instant, the coiling mountain saber's blade turned into a saw blade. Sparks flew in all directions as Yu Yao's carapace was broken open. Intense pain shot through her body, causing her to cry out in shock. Lu Yi clenched his teeth and unleashed his full power, slashing down fiercely. Blood splattered everywhere. Along with it, half of his arm flew out. The several layers of holy defenses in front of Lu Yi shattered like paper. Barriers condensed from spiritual energy couldn't withstand the impact of transcendence energy. In a hurry, Lu Yi turned around. A hard fist slammed into Lu Ye's back, punching a hole in it. His chest swelled up, as if his heart was about to burst out of his chest. Under the tremendous force, Lu Yi flew out like an arrow. Blood spurted from his mouth. He felt a powerful force rampaging through his body like a poisonous snake. It was undoubtedly the transcendence energy that had invaded his body. However, the innate skill tree soon came into play. It burned away the transcendence energy that had invaded his body. After flying for dozens of li, Lu Yi finally regained his footing. As soon as he turned around, he saw the Yu Yao insect chasing after him with a ferocious expression. End of chapter. Chapter 1556. Yu Yao had actually lost an arm to a constellation. Even if he had been careless, this should not have happened. This was a great humiliation, and he would be mocked by the other Yu Yao for the rest of his life. With such humiliation, how could he vent his anger if he did not kill Lu Yi? But before he could reach Lu Yi, he was met with a pair of cold eyes. The source of this gaze was not Lu Yi, but Yaya, who he had been holding in his arms all this time. Yaya was very obedient. Lu Yi had told her not to be rash, so she had been quiet until now, until Lu Yi was injured by Yu Yao. Yaya was clearly a little angry. At this moment, there was a strange glow in her eyes. She stared at the furious insectoid Yu Yao as if she was looking at a dead person. Under her gaze, Yu Yao felt her heart beating like a drum. The more she rushed forward, the stronger the sense of danger in her heart, as if there was some inexplicable danger waiting for her. Under Lu Ye's watchful gaze, Yu Yao of the insect race began to slow down. Finally, she came to a stop a few dozen kilometers away. He stared at Yaya, who was in Lu Ye's arms, and his expression changed inexplicably. He hesitated for a while, but in the end he did not dare to take the risk. Without saying a word, he turned around and left. He did not think that Yaya was an ordinary child. How could she be ordinary if she could survive in the starry sky? However, he had not sensed any trace of cultivation from Yaya from beginning to end. This made him somewhat unable to see through her. It was precisely because he could not see through her that he did not dare to take the risk. This time, the insect race had kicked an iron plate. He did not know where these humans had come from, but they had killed so many of the insect race's constellations. Even he himself had not been able to regain his dignity. Yu Yao of the insect race left, not forgetting to take her severed arm with her. The insect race constellations watching from afar naturally did not dare to stay any longer and scattered like birds. Lu Yi coughed softly and suppressed the roiling blood in his chest. He realized that there was still a considerable gap between him and Yu Yao. Even though he was now possessed by Li Shang and had the advantage of the new mountain saber, he still found it difficult to deal with Yu Yao of the insect race. The reason for this was the difference in the quality of the power in his body. If both of them had spiritual energy in their bodies, Lu Yi felt that he would be able to kill Yu Yao even if her cultivation was higher. However, before the spiritual energy in his body was converted into transcendence energy, it would be too difficult to kill Yu Yao. "Daddy, I scared him away." Yaya suddenly opened her mouth with a proud expression. "Yaya, you're awesome," Lu Yi praised as he turned around to look at the place where his star boat had crashed. The star boat was still tied up by the spider web and hovering between a few meteorites. However, the star beast spider that had occupied the largest meteorite was nowhere to be seen. Lu Yi had been busy fighting the insects just now, so he didn't notice when the star beast spider had disappeared. Li Shang dispelled the soul attachment and flew out of Lu Ye's body, saying, "Wait here. I'll go get the star boat." Lu Yi nodded and sat down. Then he took out some healing and recovery pills from his storage ring and swallowed them. It consumed a lot of energy. Although the leaping technique was good, it put a huge burden on the body. This burden didn't just come from the consumption of the body's spiritual energy, but also from the pressure on the body. It could be said that if the body wasn't strong enough, it would be impossible to obtain the essence of the leaping technique. The battle just now hadn't lasted too long, but Lu Ye's spirit qi had already been consumed by more than half, and even his flesh was showing signs of being torn apart. However, this kind of damage was nothing to him, and he could easily recover after some rest. Even the punch from Yu Yao from the insect clan that landed on his back was only a light injury. Yu Yao, on the other hand, had lost an arm to him. Normally speaking, it wouldn't be a big deal for Yu Yao to lose an arm. Just like Kong Cheng, who had lost an arm but still managed to regrow it after paying a certain price. However, it was Fong's new mountain blade that had severed his arm. Lu Yi knew about Fong's strange power. If Yu Yao wanted to regrow her severed arm, it might be a little troublesome, unless he had the ability to dispel Fong's power. Overall, although he didn't manage to kill Yu Yao in this battle, he didn't suffer any losses. Li Shang quickly pulled the planetary ship out of the spiderweb and steered it to Lu Yi. He then cleaned up the battlefield and collected the storage rings of the dead insectoid constellations. Only then did the group set off again. Lu Yi originally thought that the insectoids wouldn't give up so easily. If Yu Yao couldn't take them down in the early stages, there would definitely be stronger insectoids waiting for them ahead. However, to his surprise, the rest of the journey was peaceful. No more insectoids came looking for trouble. Even if they occasionally encountered some insectoids, they would avoid them and pretend they didn't see them. After thinking about it carefully, Lu Yi more or less understood. Now that the insectoids wanted to encroach on indefinite star system, they wouldn't have the leisure to target a passerby. Moreover, the further he went, the further away he would be from indefinite. The insectoids wouldn't chase after him all the way. This was something Lu Yi was happy to see. Although he hated the insectoids, he didn't want to get entangled with them at a time like this. Without being disturbed, his injuries healed very quickly. Almost immediately after his injuries were healed, he immersed himself in his thoughts and entered the green palace inside the puppet. A short while later, two figures flashed back and forth in the hall. Both of them were as fast as lightning. Lu Yi and Yanxi had been searching for an opportunity to attack. Unfortunately, neither of them could find it, and they could only continue to flick about like this. This stalemate didn't make Lu Yi feel bored. Instead, he was rather excited. In the past, when he fought against Yanxi, he basically couldn't last for long before he found an opportunity to kill him. Now that he was able to maintain a stalemate with Yanxi, it undoubtedly meant that his technique had improved significantly. This was all thanks to his previous bloody battle with the insectoids. However, while he was excited, Lu Yi was also somewhat troubled. If this stalemate continued, neither of them would be able to do anything to the other. In that case, how could he pass Yanxi's test? They couldn't compete to see who could last longer, could they? Just as he was thinking about this, Yanxi's figure suddenly froze. Lu Yi also hurriedly stopped and looked over. He saw Yanxi nodding slightly at him, then his figure suddenly dissipated. Lu Yi was stunned for a moment, then immediately realized what was going on. It seemed that things weren't as complicated as he thought. In the technique, as long as one could maintain a stalemate with Yanxi for a certain amount of time, they would undoubtedly pass his test. Just like when Qing Li's figure disappeared and Yanxi appeared, now that Yanxi's figure had dissipated, another figure appeared out of thin air. Lu Yi looked forward with some anticipation. The inheritance left behind by the two ancestors in skeleton had benefited him greatly, so Lu Yi wanted to know which race the next ancestor would be from and what inheritance he had left behind. The figure slowly condensed and gradually solidified, but Lu Yi's expression slowly became strange. This was because he realized that the third ancestor actually looked like an insectoid. Taking a closer look, it wasn't just similar, it was actually an insectoid. Skeleton had actually been obtained by an insectoid before. This made Lu Yi a little surprised. However, on second thought, skeleton had existed in this world for countless years. In these tens of thousands of years, who knew how many experts had obtained it, so it wasn't strange that there was an insectoid. This insectoid had the appearance of a human, but his two arms weren't normal arms, but two long swords. This design was very familiar to Lu Yi. Back in the 9 states, he had seen this design before. Among the insectoid, there was a branch that looked like a praying mantis, and the two swords were like that. This was also the weapon that the praying mantis used to kill their enemies, unparalleled in sharpness. After the insectoid appeared, he glanced at Lu Yi, and just like when Qing Li and Yanxi first appeared, he slowly opened his mouth and said, "Insectoid, Qing Mantis." This time, he only reported his race and name, but didn't say where he came from. As soon as he finished speaking, Qing Mantis turned around, and a mantis sword came slashing down. Lu Yi quickly raised his sword to block, and with a clang, Lu Yi's body sank down slightly. The fight with Qing Li and Yanxi made Lu Yi understand that no matter how great these ancestors' achievements were, or how high they stood, in this green hall inside the Fang Blade, the spirit power that they could use was almost the same as his. This was because the source of that spirit power was the spirit power that he channeled into the blade. However, it was only the spirit power that was almost the same. Their strength, speed, and reflexes were all at the standard that they had when they were in the later stages of the constellation realm. Just by looking at the strength of Qing Mantis' sword, Lu Yi knew that his strength wasn't inferior to his own, and his speed seemed to be even faster. Under normal circumstances, Lu Yi would definitely counterattack after blocking this attack, but he quickly realized that he didn't even have the chance to do so. Under the pressure of the Mantis sword, Qing Mantis turned around. Before Lu Yi could recover from the pressure of the first strike, Qing Mantis' second strike was already coming down, and its speed seemed to be slightly faster than the first strike. Lu Yi's body shook again, and he was surprised because this strike wasn't just faster, it seemed to be stronger as well. Then, his expression turned bitter because he already had a premonition of what was going to happen next. As expected, Qing Mantis kept on turning, and the two sabers crisscrossed and slashed at Lu Yi. After the first strike, there was a second strike, and there was no pause at all. In Lu Ye's perception, each of Qing Fu's slashes was stronger than the last. In just a few dozen strikes, Lu Yi was almost pressed to the ground. He didn't use Yan Shi's leaping technique because this wasn't a life-and-death battle with the enemy. He wanted to comprehend the inheritance that Qing Mantis had left behind. So, while he was under great pressure, he observed Qing Mantis's movements closely. The swift strikes left Lu Yi with no chance of counterattacking, and the increasing weight of the sabers slowly pushed Lu Yi to his limits. Until Qing Mantis slashed down again, Lu Yi couldn't resist anymore and was sent flying out of the Green Hall. End of chapter. Chapter 1557. Lu Yi frowned as he felt a slight pain in his head. There was no doubt that Qing Fu's inheritance was not easy to comprehend because she used dual blades. If Lu Yi really wanted to comprehend Qing Fu's inheritance, he would have to find a second blade. Ever since he started cultivating, Lu Yi had never used dual blades. He had no experience in this aspect. Trying it out rashly would not only not increase his strength, but would also hinder him. However, in order to comprehend Qing Fu's inheritance, he had no choice but to give it a try. If he could not pass Qing Fu's test, he would not be able to see the glory of his ancestors. However, he soon thought of another problem. He was only a manifestation of his divine sense in the Cyan Hall, not his real body. He did not bring the Pan Shan blade in, but it appeared directly on his body. Even if he did find another blade, could he bring it into the Cyan Hall? Although he had doubts, he still had to give it a try. He had collected many storage rings, some from the Mist Dragon, and some from the insect race cultivators that Li Shang had collected. He had been too lazy to check before, but now he could only see if there were any blade-type treasures in those storage rings. He took out those storage rings and opened them one by one. There was nothing good in the insect race cultivators' storage rings. They were all useless things. However, Lu Yi did not find many valuable treasures in the Mist Dragon storage rings. He even gained a lot of spirit jades and spirit crystals. He really did find a blade. Lu Yi took out the blade and examined it carefully. He was slightly surprised. This blade was very long, more than half the length of the Pan Shan blade. It did not have a scabbard. Even if it had been in the storage ring for many years, it still did not show any signs of decay. Lu Yi tried to channel his spirit qi into it, but there was no reaction. This thing was most likely a transcendent armor-grade long blade. It was impossible to determine the cultivation of the cultivators trapped in the Mist Dragon, but he could tell by looking at Yaya that it was a starry sky wonder that even Rizhao was lost in. Therefore, it was normal for Yu Yao or Rizhao to be trapped in there. It was not surprising that they had transcendent armor-grade treasures in their storage rings. This magic treasure-level saber had a strange shape. It looked like a huge fang that had been broken from the mouth of some ferocious beast. Lu Yi looked at the saber hilt and found a symbol engraved on it. Looking at it carefully, he could vaguely make out the word fang. Teeth knife. With the two sabers in hand, Lu Yi did not tarry. He immersed himself in the Azure Hall once more. He looked at his left hand and froze. He hadn't brought teeth knife with him. His left hand, which had been holding teeth knife, was now empty. How was he supposed to play this game? If he wanted to comprehend Qing Fu's double blade art, he would need two blades. However, he only had one Pan Shan blade. He couldn't bring the second one with him. How could he comprehend it? He couldn't possibly use the Pan Shan saber's scabbard, could he? While Lu Yi looked helpless, Qing Fu didn't hesitate to attack again. Just like the first time, she spun around and slashed down with her two swords. Her speed was getting faster and faster, and her strength was getting stronger and stronger. Lu Yi found it harder and harder to defend. He tried to use the scabbard of the Pan Shan saber as a second sword, but he felt that it wasn't quite right. Not long after, Qing Fu was forced out of the Azure Hall. Lu Yi had a headache. He was faced with an unsolvable problem. When he immersed himself in the Azure Hall, he could only see the Pan Shan saber. Without a second sword, he couldn't comprehend Qing Fu's legacy. If he couldn't comprehend it, he wouldn't be able to see the power of his ancestors. In this situation, it seemed that he would have to use the scabbard of the Panshan saber as a second sword. But when Lu Yi tried it, he realized that it wasn't a wise choice. While he was thinking, Lu Ye's eyes brightened. He seemed to have forgotten something. If he could bring that thing into the Azure Hall, then his problem would be solved. If he could immerse himself in the Azure Hall, and the Panshan saber was reflected in it, then that thing should have been reflected in it as well. He just hadn't thought about it. Thinking of this, Lu Yi rested for a while and entered the Azure Hall again. This time, before Qing Fu could make a move, Lu Yi lowered his head and looked at his mountain pan saber. Then, with a thought, he reached out and grabbed the other saber. Soul Cutter. This was a treasure from Jiuzhou's Tianji treasury. It was a soul item, but it had the ability to meld with other weapons. It could even change its shape. Lu Yi had always used it to set up restrictions on his saber to increase the power of the Panshan saber. From the looks of it, the soul-severing saber could indeed materialize in this green hall. Lu Yi now had two sabers at his disposal. Han Sen's heart jumped. He quickly changed Soul Cutter to look like Teeth Knife. He thought that if he really mastered dual knife skills, he would need to use Teeth Knife to fight his enemies. If he could familiarize himself with Teeth Knife, he would be able to use it more effectively. As soon as he finished this, Qing Fu came to kill him. This time, Lu Yi didn't last long, but he could finally practice. He was happy. On this day, when Lu Ye's mind exited the Azure Hall, he heard Li Shang say, "The Thousand Hills grave is up ahead." When Lu Yi heard this, he looked up and saw a large patch of pink in front of him. The pink patches were scattered all over the sky. At first glance, they looked like pink cotton candy. He didn't know when they were born, and he didn't know how long they would last. But the pink nebulae were very strange. They all looked like grave mounds. That was how the Thousand Hills grave got its name. This was a space wonder, but it was different from most space wonders. Although it covered an area large enough to cover several galaxies, the nebula burial mounds were very scattered. Therefore, although it was a space wonder, as long as one didn't enter the nebula burial mounds and just passed by, there wasn't much danger. Yaya climbed on top of Lu Ye's head and looked at the pink nebulae. She cheered and seemed very happy. What a sight! Lu Yi looked at it quietly. The starry sky was full of different sceneries. It was very rare to see such a spectacular scene in the domain. Even someone as strong as Ri Guang could only feel his own insignificance in front of such a space wonder. However, the reincarnation tree had given Lu Yi a warning in the star chart. Although there was no special danger in the Thousand Hills grave, he couldn't easily get close to the pink nebulae. This was because these things were very mysterious and strange. It was not something a constellation like Lu Yi could deal with. Lu Yi didn't know what was strange about these nebulae, but he wouldn't try it. "Are you going home or am I going home?" Li Shang couldn't help but roll her eyes at him. Ever since they embarked on the return journey, the task of steering the star boat had basically fallen on Li Shang's shoulders. Moreover, when she was steering the star boat, Lu Yi was basically in a meditative state of cultivation. If it weren't for Yaya accompanying her, the journey would have been extremely boring. Lu Yi was embarrassed. He felt that he shouldn't have done this. After all, he was going home. It was wrong of him to treat Li Shang as a laborer. He quickly took out a lot of spirit refining grass and put it in a storage ring. He offered it with both hands. "Thank you for your hard work." Li Shang grunted and said, "That's more like it." She didn't really want to ask Lu Yi for anything, but she couldn't refuse the spirit refining grass. It was very useful to her. She happily accepted it and felt much better. The planetary boat entered the area enveloped by the Thousand Hills grave, passing through numerous pink nebulas that looked like grave mounds. Lu Yi did not enter the Green Palace again. Although the reincarnation tree was marked on the star map, it was better to be safe than sorry. Therefore, he felt that it was better to be cautious. Han Sen used this time to familiarize himself with Teeth Knife. If a weapon practitioner wanted to use the full power of their weapon, they had to practice it through many life and death situations. Take the Pan Mountain knife for example. It had been with Lu Yi since he was very weak. It had already reached the level where Lu Yi could use the knife. So, Lu Yi could use the full power of the Pan Mountain knife. If it were any other knife, it would be a bit uncomfortable. Teeth knife was used to learn green skeleton knife skills. It wasn't Lu Ye's main knife, and he didn't have that many life and death situations to practice it. Plus, it was a treasure. It wouldn't be easy for Lu Yi to use it as a weapon. So, Lu Yi thought of a trick. This was the most common way for weapon practitioners to get new weapons. Every now and then, he would put a drop of his own blood into the knife to familiarize himself with it. That way, when he needed to use it, he would be able to wield it like an extension of his arm. According to the star chart, it would take at least 3 months to get through the Thousand Hills grave. The journey was very peaceful. Because the nebulae were very scattered, the ship rarely had to change directions. If they did, they just had to avoid the tombs. 1 month had passed. On this day, while the ship was traveling, Yaya excitedly pointed in a direction and said, "Dad, look." Lu Yi looked in the direction she was pointing. At first, he didn't see anything special. But as he got closer and closer, he was shocked. This was because a gigantic bird was standing on top of a grave shield nebula in that direction. The nebulae in the Thousand Hills grave were each the size of a star. But at this moment, the bird was standing on top of them. It looked like it was standing on top of a bird's nest. The bird was so big that Lu Yi had never seen it before. The bird's body was green, and he didn't know if it was a star beast or not. At this moment, the green bird was using its sharp claws to pull at the pink nebula. It looked like it was looking for something. Under its pull, the pink nebula moved as if it had a life of its own. Sometimes, pink tentacles would come out of the pink nebula and attack the green bird. They were so powerful that they could destroy stars and moons. End of chapter. Chapter 1558. Lu Yi was dumbfounded. Only now did he realize how dangerous the pink nebula was. Not to mention him, even Yaya might not be able to withstand such an attack. However, the blue bird didn't seem to notice it at all. It simply ignored the attacks of the pink tentacles and allowed them to hit its body. Green halos flashed across its body, blocking the attacks of the tentacles, while the pair of sharp claws under its feet kept moving. After an unknown period of time, the pink nebula split open from the middle, and the blue bird pecked down with its beak. Lu Yi didn't see clearly what it pecked, but he vaguely saw something that looked like a huge pink worm being pecked into its mouth. It raised its head and swallowed it. After the blue bird swallowed the pink worm-like thing, the pink tentacles that were still attacking it seemed to have lost their power. They fell limply and merged back into the nebula. However, the blue bird seemed to be drunk. Its body swayed left and right, and it flapped its wings a few times. After a while, it lay on the nebula, motionless. "Let's go, let's go." Lu Yi hurriedly called out to Li Shang. They couldn't stay here any longer. Although the blue bird didn't seem to notice them, such a ferocious bird wasn't something they could provoke. What made Lu Ye's hair stand on end was that the nebula in the Thousand Hills grave seemed to be alive. Li Shang also knew that they couldn't stay here any longer. He hurriedly steered the starboat to the side at full speed. Just as the starboat was making a detour, Lu Yi suddenly saw the cyan bird raise its head and cast a glance in his direction. Even though they were tens of thousands of miles apart, Lu Yi still felt a chill run down his spine from his head to the soles of his feet when he saw the cyan bird. Then he saw the blue bird open its beak. Li Shang immediately cried out in alarm, because an inexplicable suction force suddenly appeared around them. Under the suction force, he couldn't steer the starboat anymore. The next moment, the starboat flew towards the blue bird like an arrow leaving the bow. "It's over." Lu Ye's expression was bitter. He knew that he was really going to die this time. He had seen the blue bird's power from afar just now and knew that it was not something he could resist. Even if he asked Yaya to help, the chances were slim. With this bite, the starboat and the people on it would definitely be devoured. Why am I so unlucky? Lu Yi was puzzled. Everything had been fine along the way, but now they had to suffer a calamity. He and Li Shang were both nervous and perturbed. Yaya, on the other hand, was clapping her hands and cheering with a happy look on her face, as if she was completely unaware of the imminent doom. In less than 10 breaths of time, the star boat had traveled hundreds of thousands of miles and was sucked right in front of the blue bird. However, to Lu Ye's surprise, just as the star boat was about to fall into the blue bird's mouth, the power that was trying to devour the star boat suddenly disappeared. Just like that, the star boat floated in front of the blue bird. Looking at it from a close distance, Lu Yi could feel the magnificence of the blue bird's body. At this moment, Lu Yi couldn't see the blue bird's full appearance at all, only a pair of huge sun-like eyes blocking his vision. The blue bird seemed to be really drunk, as its eyes were somewhat hazy. It tilted its head and sized up the star boat, then looked at the three little people on it. Then, its eyelids opened and closed, and it seemed to have lost its interest in studying them. Once again, it lay down on the nebula and closed its eyes to take a nap. Lu Yi and Li Shang didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Only when the blue bird lay down again did Lu Yi let out a sigh of relief. He knew that the blue bird had no interest in them at all, and probably only brought them here because it was curious about their star boat. Fortunately, they weren't swallowed by the blue bird. Perhaps it was because the blue bird was full, otherwise, they would have died in vain. Lu Yi slowly turned his head and looked at Li Shang. He gave him a meaningful glance, and Li Shang nodded knowingly. Just as the two of them stealthily prepared to leave while the blue bird was taking a nap, Yaya suddenly jumped up from the star boat with a joyful cry. Lu Yi was shocked and raised his hand to grab her, but Yaya's movements were so fast that Lu Yi couldn't catch her at all. Then he saw Yaya fly to the blue bird's beak and climb all the way up. Judging from her posture, it seemed that she wanted to fly to the bird's head. Lu Ye's blood turned cold again, but soon he found that he was overthinking because Yaya's movements were quite loud, but the blue bird didn't seem to care at all. It just lay there, minding its own business. Even when Yaya stood on the blue bird's head and waved at Lu Yi, the blue bird still didn't respond. It was impossible that such a powerful bird didn't notice anything. Since it didn't respond, it meant that it didn't care about it. Lu Yi had mixed feelings. It seemed that sometimes being too weak wasn't a bad thing. At the very least, the strong wouldn't have any interest in the weak. Let's go and have a look. Lu Yi turned his head and said to Li Shang. At this point, it was useless to be afraid. As he spoke, he flashed out of the star boat and flew up with Li Shang. Soon, they arrived at the blue bird's head. Lu Yi thought that Yaya had called him up because she had found something strange, but it turned out that wasn't the case. Yaya was lying on a feather on the blue bird's head with a comfortable expression. After Lu Yi and Li Shang came up, she patted the side and motioned for Lu Yi to lie down as well. Lu Yi lay down beside her and Li Shang on the other side. Yaya was even happier, holding each of their arms and giggling nonstop. Lu Yi lay down for a while and found nothing mysterious. He stood up again and looked around. Soon, he was attracted by the nebula where the blue bird was lying. This nebula was originally a whole mass, but after it was torn apart by the green bird's sharp claws, it had not been restored. Looking down from this position, the scene looked like a grave that had been split open, and it was pink inside. Thinking about it, Lu Yi asked Li Shang to stay where he was with Yaya, and he flew down. He was still very curious about the mystery of this grave nebula. He didn't have the chance to explore it, but now that he had the chance, he naturally wanted to see it. The grave nebula had been torn apart, and the big worm-like thing inside had been swallowed by the blue bird. There should be no danger. Entering the grave through the huge crack, he saw pink everywhere. Looking from the inside, it was like a fleshy chamber, like the viscera of some creature. Lu Yi could feel that there seemed to be some strange aura left inside. This aura was familiar to him, but he couldn't remember what it was. After looking around for a while, Lu Ye's eyes were quickly attracted by something in a corner of the nebula. The object was several dozen feet long and had signs of being broken. Lu Yi pondered for a moment and understood what it was. It was the broken part of the big insect that the blue bird had swallowed. It looked like the insect's tail. It seemed that although the blue bird had swallowed the big worm, there were still some remnants, but these remnants were too small for the blue bird to be interested in. Lu Yi was very interested. For the blue bird, dozens of feet was indeed small, but for him, it was very big. Walking forward, he came to where the worm's tail was, and the familiar aura became stronger. Lu Yi raised his hand and touched it, finding that it felt like flesh, but what surprised Lu Yi was that this worm's tail seemed to contain an extremely rich and surging energy. With a thought, he urged the power of the talent tree, and invisible roots extended and pierced into the worm's tail. The next moment, Lu Yi showed a look of surprise, because the energy in this broken worm's tail was indeed surging, even beyond his imagination. So far, the resources he had used for his cultivation were nothing more than spirit jade. He had also tried to refine a few spirit crystals, but in comparison, the energy contained in spirit crystals was purer and stronger than spirit jade, but it was far inferior to the energy contained in this worm's tail. Lu Ye's eyes lit up. This was a treasure. This worm's tail could be used as a spirit jade or even a spirit crystal. If converted into spirit crystals, it was estimated that it would be worth millions of pieces. And this was only an insignificant part of it. The blue bird had swallowed the bulk of it. This was only from the Grave Mound Nebula, and the Grave Mound Nebula in the Thousand Mound Grave was difficult to calculate. If every grave mound contained such a treasure, then this place was simply a land of treasures. Lu Yi was a little puzzled. Did the powerhouses in the starry sky not know about the situation here, or did they not know of such a place, or did they not have the ability to obtain it? But no matter what the situation was, this worm's tail was his. Lu Yi was in a good mood. He had never imagined that being sucked here by the blue bird would result in such an astonishing harvest. He tried to put the worm's tail into his storage ring, but he couldn't because it was too big. After inspecting it, he found that the end of the worm's tail was still connected to the nebula. It was probably because of this that the blue bird's tail broke when it swallowed the strange worm. Lu Yi could only take out the Panshan saber and cut the worm's tail into pieces. This was physical work because the worm's tail was very tough. Even the Panshan saber with the divine edge could only do limited damage to it. Lu Yi could only urge the 10,000 tidal waves to create a saw on the Panshan saber's blade, slowly sawing the worm's tail. By the time he had sawed the worm's tail into a dozen pieces and put them all into his storage ring, several days had passed. During this time, Li Shang came down to check once, but seeing that he was busy, he didn't disturb him. It was not until several days later that Lu Yi put away all the worm's tails. After checking around and making sure that there was nothing left, he flew out. Reunited with Li Shang and Yaya, Lu Yi looked at the blue bird under his feet. There was no longer much fear in his heart. Instead, he was full of gratitude to the blue bird. If he wasn't in a hurry to return to the 9 states, he would have stayed here for a while. Maybe he could get some benefits from the blue bird. The blue bird was still sleeping. It seemed that after eating the worm, it needed some time to digest. Lu Yi took Li Shang and Yaya back to the star boat and set off on the way back. End of chapter. Chapter 1559. Along the way, they encountered many nebula burial mounds. However, they did not see any signs of damage. Logically speaking, with the azure bird's previous actions, many of the nebula burial mounds should have been torn apart. However, that was not the case. Lu Yi guessed that the torn nebula burial mounds would slowly heal. 2 months later, the star boat finally left the Thousand Hills burial mounds range. Lu Yi looked at the star map, feeling excited. According to the star map, he only needed to pass through the explosion zone to reach the Jade Conch Galaxy. This showed just how remote the Jade Conch Galaxy was. Lu Yi did not know what the other galaxies were like, but based on the direction he was heading, the closest galaxy to the Jade Conch Galaxy was indefinite. However, the 2 galaxies were separated by 3 regions. The first was the territory of the insect race. Even with the star boat, it took Lu Yi more than 3 months to pass through it. After that was the Thousand Hills burial mound, and then the explosion zone. It also took 3 months to pass through the Thousand Hills burial mound. However, the explosion zone covered a much larger area than the Thousand Hills burial mound. Lu Yi estimated that it would take at least half a year. After passing through the explosion zone, he finally reached the edge of the Jade Conch Galaxy. If he wanted to return to the 9 states, he would have to travel a long way. Unlike the relative safety of the Thousand Hills burial mound, the explosion zone was filled with danger. Even if Ri Zhao accidentally got sucked in, he would be injured if not killed. Fortunately, Most of the dangers in the explosion zone could be observed in advance. Thus, he had to be careful when traveling in such a place. After the star boat entered the zone of mayhem, Lu Yi didn't dare to be distracted at all. Instead, he kept a vigilant eye on the surroundings. At first, everything was peaceful. However, a few days later, Lu Yi suddenly discovered unusual movements that were rapidly approaching them from hundreds of thousands of kilometers away. When he looked carefully, he saw that there seemed to be something like a tornado coming from that direction. However, it was different from a normal tornado. This tornado that appeared in the starry sky was extremely large, and the area it covered was also extremely terrifying. Many asteroids of various sizes were caught in the tornado, and they spun rapidly. It was a chaotic scene. The word explosion in the chaotic explosion zone referred to the cosmic magnetic explosion. That tornado was not a real tornado, but a manifestation of a force field. It was something similar to a magnetic force field, which was why it was so dangerous. The magnetic force field was simply the nemesis of cultivators. No matter how high one's cultivation was, being in the magnetic force field would be greatly suppressed. Once one was involved in this kind of magnetic explosion, under the premise that it was difficult to exert all of one's strength, it was very likely that one would be unable to resist the impact of the large and small meteorites. Therefore, when traveling in the chaotic explosion zone, one had to follow a principle. They had to stay as close to the dead stars or desolate stars in this area as possible. This way, even if they accidentally encountered such a magnetic storm, they could find a place to hide in time. Upon seeing the tornado-like magnetic storm, Lu Yi took over the steering of the star boat and drove it towards a desolate star in the vicinity. He landed directly on the back of the desolate star, found an isthmus, and went in with Yaya. As for Li Shang, he had already hidden in Lu Ye's spirit sea at the first opportunity. For ordinary cultivators, the magnetic storm was a great threat, but for the soul race, it was simply fatal. Just as he hid, Lu Yi heard a continuous whistling sound pass by his ear. Obviously, the magnetic storm was blowing over. And under the influence of this magnetic explosion, Lu Ye's body could not help but sink, and all his spiritual power seemed to be imprisoned in his body, unable to be activated. In this state, he was just an existence with a relatively strong physical body. Instinctively, he activated the power of the talent tree, wanting to resist the suppression of this magnetic explosion, but Lu Yi soon remembered that the power of the talent tree did not seem to have much effect on this suppression. He had tried this when he was in the 9 states. When he first went deep into the 9 states to investigate the situation of the insect race's great mystic realm, he had borrowed the power of the Dragon Emperor, who could completely isolate the influence of the magnetic field. But what surprised him was that after activating the power of the talent tree, the fuel reserves of the talent tree were rapidly consumed. At the same time, his body became lighter, and the suppression disappeared without a trace. Lu Yi was slightly stunned, but soon understood. The talent tree was not the talent tree of the past. Back when he went deep into the insect race's great mystic realm to investigate, the talent tree had only undergone 1 transformation. Today, it had undergone 3 transformations, and its power was naturally stronger than before. It was just that the price to pay seemed to be a little high. This kind of force field suppression was invisible and continuous, so the talent tree had to maintain a state of incinerating impurities at all times to burn away the invisible force field that invaded the body. Naturally, it would be a heavy burden on the fuel reserves of the talent tree. The fuel reserves of the talent tree now could not withstand such consumption. Instead of using it to resist the suppression of the magnetic explosion, it would be better to use it for cultivation in the Wanxiang Sea. Thinking of this, Lu Yi gently put Yaya down, then summoned the Dragon Emperor to protect himself, and then held Yaya in his arms. Lu Yi could clearly feel that Yaya was also being suppressed by the magnetic field. Her small brows were furrowed, and she looked unhappy. However, she had Rizhao's backing after all, so Lu Yi wasn't sure how much this suppression would affect her. This magnetic explosion lasted for half a day before it was over. Only then did Lu Yi put away the Dragon Emperor and rush out of the isthmus with Yaya in his arms. Looking in the direction of the magnetic explosion, He summoned the planetary boat again and hurried on. Although there were many dead stars and desolate stars in this chaotic explosion zone that could be used as shelter, if one was unlucky and could not find a suitable place to take shelter when the magnetic explosion arrived, it would be equally troublesome. In such a strange place, Li Shang was of no help at all. Ever since he hid in Lu Ye's divine ocean, he had not shown himself. Lu Ye's luck was not bad. He had encountered such magnetic storms several times in a row and found a place to take shelter in time. But there was always a time when one's luck ran out. Once again he saw a magnetic storm in the distance. Lu Yi hurriedly looked around, but he did not find any traces of dead stars or desolate stars. Seeing that the magnetic storm was about to sweep over, Lu Yi could only grit his teeth and summon the Dragon Emperor again. He then grabbed Yaya and placed her on his chest with one hand, preparing to resist the magnetic storm this time. Instead of dodging, he turned around and faced the magnetic storm head-on. Only by going in the opposite direction could he get out of the range of the magnetic storm more quickly. The huge dragon spine saber had been summoned, and the scarlet figure, which was 30 feet tall, rushed into the magnetic storm. It was like a drop of water falling into the sea, without a single ripple. Before, Lu Yi had been looking for a suitable place to take shelter, and it was difficult for him to understand the horror of this magnetic storm. Now that he was in it himself, he immediately realized how dangerous it was. Being in the middle of it, he soon lost his sense of direction. No matter how hard he tried, he could only follow the direction of the magnetic storm. If that was all, it would be fine. The key was that there were countless meteorites mixed in the magnetic storm. After an unknown period of time, each meteorite was moving at an extremely fast speed. Lu Yi held the dragon spine saber and tried to cut down a few meteorites that were crashing toward him. As a result, his arms were numb from the impact. In a moment of carelessness, he was hit by a huge meteorite. Even with the protection of the Dragon Emperor, Lu Ye's blood was boiling and he saw stars. In the magnetic storm, Lu Yi struggled to move. Under this kind of starry sky, the strength of an individual was too small. After more than 2 hours, Lu Yi still couldn't pass through the magnetic storm. He even wondered if he could pass through it. Being wrapped up in the magnetic storm like this, he often couldn't control himself. Just as Lu Yi was having a headache, he suddenly felt Yaya's aura recover. In the blink of an eye, Yaya's aura was at Yu Yao's level. But that was it. It seemed that the magnetic storm had a great suppressive effect on her. Before Lu Yi could understand what was going on, Yaya grabbed him by the arm and dragged him in a certain direction. There was clearly some urgency on her face. The next moment, Lu Yi felt an extremely frightening suction force coming from another direction. That suction force felt familiar, and then he was surprised to see that the meteorites around him had changed directions and were heading in the direction of the suction force. Yaya's hand was exerting force, and it was obvious that she was fighting against the suction force. But no matter how hard she fought, the two of them, one big and one small, were still slowly being pulled by the suction force. They followed the magnetic storm and slid in the direction of the suction force. The magnetic storm around them was getting smaller and smaller, gradually disappearing into nothingness. The suction force was also extinguished. Lu Yi, who was dizzy and disoriented, saw a pair of eyes shining like the sun. They were staring in his direction. When he looked behind him, he saw a huge bird's head and a bird's body that was as big as a star. It was glowing with a green light. A green bird! Lu Yi was surprised. He didn't expect to see that huge green bird again in this place. But this time, the green bird gave him a different feeling. Last time, the green bird hadn't shown any interest in him. This time, Lu Yi could feel a trace of hostility in its eyes. "Dad, take it off," Yaya suddenly said. She looked a little nervous. Although Lu Yi didn't know what was going on, he hurriedly removed the dragon throne and put it away. The cyan bird stared at him for a while, causing Lu Ye's heart to tremble in fear. Fortunately, the trace of hostility in its eyes slowly disappeared. Then, it slowly turned around and flapped its wings twice, as if to fly away from this area. Lu Yi looked around. The magnetic storm that had enveloped him before had disappeared without a trace. It was as if it had never been there. the magnetic storm couldn't have disappeared for no reason. Combining his previous experience with the green bird in front of him, Lu Yi had a vague guess. But it was strange that the green bird had come here from the Thousand Hills tomb. Seeing that it was about to flap its wings and leave, Lu Ye's heart skipped a beat. He took Yaya and flew onto its back. The next moment, Lu Yi felt the stars move. End of chapter. Chapter 1560. The speed of the bluebird was not something that Lu Yi could compare with when he was driving the star boat. It was at least 10 times faster, and this was when the bluebird was obviously not using its full strength. Lu Yi wondered how fast it would be if it used its full strength. It was hard to tell how strong the bluebird was. The only thing Lu Yi was sure of was that it was stronger than Yaya. After using her full strength, Yaya had indeed weakened again. She curled up in Lu Ye's arms and fell asleep. Lu Yi sat on the back of the blue bird and let it fly him forward. He constantly took out the star chart and compared it with the surrounding stars. When he was caught in the magnetic storm, he had lost his way slightly. It was very troublesome to lose one's way in the starry sky, so he had to quickly find his way back. Fortunately, the star chart given by the reincarnation tree was quite detailed. Lu Yi spent some time to confirm one thing. The direction the bluebird was going was exactly the direction he needed to go. This was not bad. He could hitch a ride. Lu Yi did not see how the magnetic storm disappeared before, but he had some guesses. But after flying with the bluebird for 2 days, he finally saw it with his own eyes. The bluebird seemed to have come here specifically to look for the star magnetic storm. Whenever it found one, it would immediately pounce on it excitedly. Then, it would open its huge beak and swallow the extremely huge tornado into its mouth. Even the meteorites in the star magnetic storm were all swallowed by it. Lu Yi could not figure out where the bluebird came from. It could eat the things in the Tomb of 1,000 Hills, but it could also eat the magnetic storm. In just 10 days, Lu Yi was surprised to find that he was about to pass through the chaotic explosion zone. In his original plan, it would take about half a year to pass through the chaotic explosion zone, and this was the result of the bluebird's occasional delay in swallowing the magnetic storm. If it did not delay, it would be even faster. The bluebird changed its direction, obviously unwilling to leave the chaotic explosion zone so quickly. Seeing this, Lu Yi quickly jumped off its back and watched it leave. In a few breaths, the bluebird's huge figure turned into a small in his field of vision. Lu Yi summoned his starboat again and took Yaya aboard. Following the star chart's guidance, they flew for about 20 days without incident and finally left the chaotic explosion zone. Strictly speaking, they had arrived at the Jade Conch Galaxy, but this was only the border of the Jade Conch Galaxy. Lu Yi was excited. He recalled when he was chased by Tang Jun and accidentally fell into the insect path and entered the Wanxiang Sea. Several years had passed in the blink of an eye. After going through untold hardships, he finally returned to the Jade Conch Galaxy. He didn't know what the situation was like in the 9 prefectures, but before he left, he gave some purple amulets to eldest senior brother and the others. In an environment like Jade Conch, self-preservation shouldn't be a problem. Looking at the starry sky in all directions, Lu Yi found it very strange. Lu Yi had never been to this area, so he naturally could not see the familiar stars. According to the star atlas given by the reincarnation tree, it would take about 4 to 5 months to return to the 9 states from here. This was the tragedy of a cultivator who had just been promoted to a large domain. No matter what they did, the efficiency was very low. It took many generations of accumulation to reach a normal level. But Lu Yi did not plan to return to the 9 provinces directly. This was because this trip back to the Wanxiang Galaxy was not only about the 9 provinces, but also the entire Jade Conch Galaxy. Therefore, he was prepared to make a trip to the Qingli Dao world or the Yulua Dao world to inform them in advance and let them prepare. In this way, when he pulled out the people from the 9 states, he could gather them and set off without wasting any time. However, the star chart given by the reincarnation tree only marked the location of the 9 provinces. Lu Yi did not know where the Qingli Dao world and the Jade Conch domain were. But since everyone was in the same galaxy, there must be cultivators of the 9 provinces wandering outside. If he was lucky, he might meet them. He could ask around and find out. Thinking of this, Lu Yi first flew forward along the route to the 9 provinces. But the further he went, the more disappointed he was. This was because there were many traces of spiritual jades in the starry sky. This meant that there were few or no traces of cultivators of the 9 provinces in this area. Otherwise, these spiritual jades would not continue to exist. Places with abundant spirit jades were usually places where people rarely went. Even astral beasts rarely appeared. Lu Yi was not in the mood to collect those spiritual jades. He was used to being extravagant. 1 or 2 pieces of spiritual jades really did not interest him. If he had the time, he could just go to the Wanxiang Sea and catch a white spirit. It would be worth thousands of spiritual jades. After flying for more than a month, Lu Ye's spirits were finally roused. This was because the further he flew, the fewer traces of spirit jades there were. This meant that there were either star mansions frequently appearing in this place, or there were star beasts active. Sure enough, Lu Yi soon encountered some star beasts. His original expectation inevitably turned into disappointment. A few days later, a bounded domain appeared in front of him. Lu Yi looked at it carefully and found that it was indeed a bounded domain. It was not a dead star or a desolate star. This bounded domain was full of vitality. There must be living creatures active in it. As to what level this bounded domain was, he would have to go deeper to explore it. The only thing he was sure of was that this was not the Qinglidao world or the Jade Conch sector. This was because there were no signs of cultivators of the 9 provinces outside the bounded domain. There were indeed only 3 large bounded domains in the Jade Conch galaxy that could be confirmed. One was the Jade Conch, one was the Qinglidao world, and one was the 9 provinces. But there were far more than 3 bounded domains that were full of vitality. Many bounded domains were simply full of vitality and did not even have living creatures in the traditional sense. Some bounded domains had living creatures, but they were just ordinary animals and plants. Or some bounded domains had reached the level of cultivation, but the level was not high. Just like the blood refining domain, there were active figures of the blood clan in the Divine Sea. But because it had not given birth to any cultivators of the 9 provinces, it was not considered a large bounded domain. There should be some bounded domains like this in the Jade Conch galaxy. Lu Yi was not very clear about the situation of the bounded domain in front of him. After thinking for a while, Lu Yi put away the star boat and rushed toward the bounded domain with Yaya. Since he was passing by, there was no harm in taking a look. After all, it would not take too long. Passing through the thick clouds, Lu Yi immediately saw the scattered cities and villages below. Using his eyesight, he could even see some of the active figures in those cities and villages. This was a bounded domain occupied by the human clan. And from all kinds of signs, the human clan in this bounded domain was actually involved in the level of cultivation. This was because Lu Yi saw some traces of flying spirit boats. He did not feel any hostility from the bounded domain. Presumably, the will of this bounded domain was not very strong. However, Lu Ye's brows slowly furrowed. This was because he vaguely felt that there was something wrong with this bounded domain. Looking from the starry sky, this bounded domain was indeed full of vitality. Logically speaking, it should be a thriving bounded domain. But when he went deep into it, Lu Yi had a strange feeling. He always felt that there was something wrong with this bounded domain. Lu Yi could not figure it out, so he called Li Shang. Li Shang flashed out from his divine sea and checked carefully. She nodded and said, "There is indeed something wrong." But as for what the problem was, she could not tell. She looked at Yaya in Lu Ye's arms and asked softly, "Yaya, did you find anything?" She and Lu Yi were only constellations. It was normal for them to have poor eyesight. Although Yaya's mind was damaged, she still had the foundation of sunshine. Perhaps she could see something. Yaya bit her thumb and pointed in a direction. "There's something there." "What is it?" Lu Yi asked quickly. "I don't know." Yaya shook her head and then looked in another direction. She said happily, "Daddy, it's so lively there. Let's go there." Lu Yi had long noticed the liveliness there. He did not know what day it was, But all the cities in the entire bounded domain and even the places where people gathered were decorated with lanterns and colored banners. Especially the city that Yaya pointed to, there were many people gathered there. Seeing Yaya's interest, Lu Yi did not want to disappoint her. He said, "Then let's go." After traveling in the starry sky for so long, Lu Yi also wanted to join in the fun. Yaya was even happier. She climbed onto Lu Yi's shoulder like a monkey and rode on his neck. Lu Yi flew over in a flash, Li Shang following closely by his side. Although there were cultivators in this bounded domain, the highest level was only at the true lake realm. Lu Yi and Li Shang deliberately hid themselves. How could those people notice? Soon they entered the city. The city was bustling with activity. Everyone was happy as if it was the new year. Lu Yi spread out his spiritual will and listened attentively. He slowly understood what was going on. This realm was called the Clear Wind Realm. Every 10 years, there would be cultivators from the upper realm who would come to pick suitable cultivators and bring them to the upper realm for cultivation. Every year, it was the grandest festival in the Clear Wind Realm. Firstly, it was to welcome the arrival of the cultivators from the upper realm. Secondly, it was to select the best cultivators in this realm. What surprised Lu Yi was that according to the conversations of the cultivators in this world, the so-called upper world was actually the Qingli Taoist world. What a coincidence! Lu Yi had been looking for cultivators from the Qingli Dao realm or the Yuluo realm in the starry sky. In the end, he could not find them after a month. He accidentally passed by the Clear Wind Realm and found out about the Qingli Dao realm. From this point of view, the Clear Wind Realm was the lower realm of the Qingli Dao realm. It was a subordinate realm of the Qingli Dao realm, just like the relationship between the blood refining realm and the 9 states. There were no more blood kindred in the blood refining realm. There were only a large number of humans living there. The major sects in the 9 states had divided a part of the territory. The good cultivators born in those territories had the opportunity to be brought to the 9 states to cultivate. Although the method was different from here, the results were the same. It was just to select the best talents. End of chapter. Chapter 1561. The people from the Qingli Dao world would be here in 3 days to pick up a batch of cultivators. Since that was the case, he only needed to wait here for 3 days, and then he would be able to rush back with the people from the Qingli Dao world. With that in mind, Lu Yi turned his head and saw Li Shang and Yaya standing in front of a stall, one big and one small, holding something in their hands, cheeks puffed up, eating happily. Lu Yi walked up and found that the stall seemed to be selling something like tonghalu, but the fruit on the tonghalu was obviously not an ordinary fruit, but a kind of bright red spirit fruit. The big one and the small one ate very quickly. In a few bites, they finished a skewer. In a few bites, another skewer. When Lu Yi came over, both of them were holding a skewer in their hands. Lu Yi was a little puzzled. It was normal for Yaya to be like this, she was just a child, but why was Li Shang like this, and she was a soul? Was it okay to eat these things? As if noticing Lu Ye's gaze, Li Shang's face was slightly red. He deliberately avoided looking at him and ate more vigorously. The stall owner opposite them was beaming with joy. In a moment, the tonghalu was eaten clean by Li Shang and Yaya. The stall owner said, 362 high-grade spirit stones. The things he sold were not very popular, mainly because the price was a little expensive. He sold a few sticks after a few days, but he did not expect 2 big customers to come and buy it all. He was naturally happy. Li Shang and Yaya licked the sugar stains on their lips together, then turned to look at Lu Yi. Lu Yi was looking around. When he reacted, his expression could not help but stiffen. They obviously wanted him to pay the bill. But they were already in the constellation realm, who would have spirit stones on them. As early as when he ascended to the constellation realm, Lu Yi left the things he did not need in the treasury of the Jade Blood sect. Yaya did not have anything. He did not expect her to pay the bill, and Li Shang did not seem to have anything like a storage ring, but he could use other things to pay the bill, such as spirit treasures or spirit pills. But the strongest cultivator in the Qingfeng realm was only Zhen Hu. Lu Ye's spirit treasures were all top level. Even if he took them out, the people of the Qingfeng realm would not be able to use them, not to mention spirit pills. spirit pills that could be used by the constellation realm, Jianghu would not end well if he took them. He couldn't possibly dine and dash, right? The stall owner seemed to be able to see Lu Ye's dilemma and his face darkened. Dear customer, if you do not pay for your food in the Clear Breeze City, you will have to consider the consequences. In order to welcome the arrival of the great cultivators from the upper realm 3 days later, the security in Clear Wind City could be said to be extremely tight. Anyone who dared to cause trouble would be sentenced to death. Therefore, although there were many cultivators gathered in Clear Wind City at this time, no one dared to disobey the rules. Wait a moment, Lu Yi said, his figure flickering and disappearing. That stall owner was stunned. Even though his cultivation level wasn't very high, it was still at the level of Yunhe. Yet, he couldn't see how Lu Yi disappeared. He immediately understood that Lu Ye's cultivation level was much higher than his, and was most likely a peak true lake stage cultivator. At the same time, on the west side of Qingfeng City, in the encampment of the Xinjiang sect, the Xinjiang sect's leader, Zhu Shang, looked to the side with a serious expression. Beside him were the elders of the Xinjiang sect. At this moment, all the elders were watching nervously. In front of these people, there was a woman in her 20s sitting upright. Her face was red and hot steam was rolling off her body. She looked like she was about to be cooked. Beside her, there were 2 cultivators dressed like medical cultivators who were treating her injuries. After spitting out the blood, the woman's condition improved slightly, but that was all. How is it? Zhu Shang asked nervously. One of the medical cultivators shook his head and said, Zhu Yu was injured by Yang fire. If the Yang fire is not removed, it will be very difficult for her to recover. However, Sect Master can rest assured that her life is no longer in danger. As long as we bring her back and slowly recuperate, she will definitely recover within half a year. Hearing this, Zhu Shang didn't look happy. Instead, his body swayed as if he was struck by lightning. Half a year. The cultivators from the upper world would arrive in 3 days. The grand competition of this realm was also in full swing. How could they make it in half a year? The cultivators from the upper world would only come to the Qingfeng realm once every 10 years. The grand competition of this realm was also held once every 10 years. According to the rules set by the cultivators from the upper world, preparations had started half a year ago. The 3 levels of Lingxi, Yunhe, and True Lake would compete. In the end, the top 10 of each level would be chosen. A total of 30 people would be able to leave with the cultivators from the upper world to cultivate in the upper world. In the Qingfeng realm, the Xinjiang sect could be considered one of the major sections. However, in this generation, the disciples from the Lingxi and Yunhe levels did not perform well. Only Zhu Yu from the True Lake realm had appeared. She had a high chance of competing for the top 10 positions. In the end, she was injured in the battle just now. If it was a normal injury, it would be fine. However, Zhu Yu's injury was very serious. There was no possibility of her continuing to participate in the grand competition. To be accepted into the upper world to cultivate was the dream of all cultivators in the Qingfeng realm. For the sects of the winners, it was a rare honor. Not only could they obtain rich resources from the cultivators from the upper world, if their disciples could establish themselves in the upper world in the future, they could also repay the sect. Therefore, the major sects of the Qingfeng realm attached great importance to this grand competition. It could be said that any disciple who had a chance of winning would receive great nurturing and expectations. Zhu Yu was only 1 step away from the final victory. In the end, she fell here. Naturally, Zhu Shang and the group of elders were heartbroken. Sect Master, now that things have come to this, we can only wait for the next 10 years. Fortunately, Zhu Yu is still young. Even if another 10 years pass, she won't lose her qualifications, an elder consoled. Zhu Shang's expression was bitter. Indeed, now that things had come to this, the Xinjiang sect was powerless to reverse the situation. They could only wait for the next 10 years and hope that their disciples would perform better. Do you need help? An unfamiliar voice suddenly rang out. The group could not help but be startled. When they looked up, they were all shocked. This was because an unfamiliar young man had appeared here without them noticing. It was as if he had been standing there the whole time. However, before he spoke, no one noticed him. Immediately, an elder-level true lake cultivator shouted angrily, "Who are you? How dare you trespass into the Jianghu sect's territory?" However, the young man did not seem to hear him. He only looked at Zhu Shang and said, "I can cure her, but I need some spirit stones." "High-grade spirit stones?" The elder who spoke earlier said sternly, "Ignorant brat, how dare you speak so arrogantly? Take him down." The two medical cultivators who treated Zhu Yu earlier were the two strongest medical cultivators in the sect. They were famous in the entire Clear Wind realm. However, even they could only save Zhu Yu's life. This young man who suddenly appeared had a saber at his waist. He looked experienced and was dressed like a weapon cultivator. How could he know how to save people? At his command, the cultivators of the Jianghu sect were about to move. However, Zhu Shang raised his hand. "Everyone stop." He stared at Lu Yi and said in a low voice, "You know how to save people? I can save her." Lu Yi looked at Zhu Yu and scanned her with his divine sense. He already knew the situation in her body. If it were not for the fact that he needed spirit stones to pay, he would not have bothered to interfere. To think that he, a late-stage constellation cultivator, would have to worry about spirit stones one day. If others knew about this, they would laugh their heads off. It was truly a case of a hero who was stumped by money. If you can't cure her in half a day, then it's meaningless. Zhu Shang continued. Half a day later, Zhu Yu would participate in the next competition. "I don't need half a day." As Lu Yi said this, he directly walked up to Zhu Yu and patted her on the shoulder. Zhu Shang instinctively wanted to stop him, but he could not hold himself back. The main reason was that he could not see through Lu Ye's background. Moreover, Lu Yi looked so calm and at ease, as if he was really confident. Their sect was already out of ideas. Since the other party was so confident, there was no harm in giving it a try. Lu Yi did not even circulate his spiritual power. He only slightly activated the power of his talent tree and scanned it along the flow of spiritual power in Zhu Yu's body. After the talent tree had undergone 3 transformations, Lu Yi knew that the talent tree could not only burn away the impurities that had invaded his body, but could also burn away the impurities in other people's bodies. However, he still needed to control it carefully, so as to avoid hurting others instead of saving them. Zhu Yu's situation was nothing more than yang fire entering her body. Even if another force had invaded her body, the talent tree could naturally burn it all away. Originally, under the treatment of the two medical cultivators, Zhu Yu's condition had improved slightly, but it was only a slight improvement. But at this moment, with Lu Ye's palm, Zhu Yu's flushed cheeks quickly returned to normal, and her difficult expression became peaceful. Her originally hot body no longer had the slightest abnormality. The cultivators of the Jianghu sect were dumbfounded. Even though they did not know the exact situation, they knew from Zhu Yu's change that Lu Ye's method was effective. But how is this possible? Such a method was simply amazing. The medical cultivator in particular looked with all his might, trying to find some clues, but he could not find anything. Lu Yi casually took out a spiritual pill and scraped some pill powder from it. He pinched open Zhu Yu's mouth and gently blew the pill powder into her mouth. Only then did he take 2 steps back and say, "Rest for a while. You should be fine." The cultivators of the Jianghu sect were dumbfounded. After a while, Zhu Shang ordered the 2 medical cultivators, "Examine her." The 2 medical cultivators seemed to have just woken up from a dream. They hurried forward and examined her. Both of them were shocked. After a while, one of them said, "Sect Master, Zhu, she's fine." They looked at Lu Yi, who was on the side, and were almost shocked to the core. Zhu Shang laughed loudly. His previous dejection was swept away, and he looked at Lu Yi. "Fellow Taoist," Lu Yi stretched out his hand. "My reward." Zhu Shang's words were interrupted, but he didn't care. He quickly took out a storage ring. Then he looked for a group of elders nearby, and poured all the spirit stones he had into the storage ring. Then he handed it over to Lu Yi. Lu Yi took it without a word. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.